Morning. It's the 26th of November, Thanksgiving weekend, and I moved it inside. It's too cold out there. And it's a pretty busy day today. I've got several things that are upcoming before the end of the day, but I just feel so strongly about keeping this time for us and keeping my commitment to sharing with you the things that I've learned and that have really gone a long way toward helping me understand how to be fair to a horse and considerate of my students. I'm so grateful to the people that have had patience with me, and also that includes my students. So often we think that and I'm in this group as well, we think that our teachers are up on some pedestal. They don't make mistakes, and they are never going to fall off the pedestal, but actually the higher you put them, the harder they fall. So I've been very grateful to have a lot of students, fortunately, who realize that, like you, there's a there's a beginning and a middle and hopefully no end to the learning. But the inner attitude that we bring to these horses and to subjects that are complex and challenging, like collection, the inner attitude is going to determine to a great degree whether we can get down to the feet and feel what it is that people who understand collection and write about it and talk about it and rave about it, that we can share with them and with our horses what is so often held up as the goal in many cases, the goal to collect your horse and to look nice in a state of collection. It's a massive topic. I'm not sure I can do it in one sitting, but I'm going to do my best to lay some groundwork for what I think will be hopefully a long discussion. And for those of you who have never heard of collection or are not sure why it's so important, I'm going to have some remarks that may sound very elementary and very unnecessary to people who perhaps have mastered it, or who teach it, or who have horses that they bought who already are very comfortable being collected and performing, or being schooled in a collected frame. But I think the best way for me to talk about this is to start off by talking about cows. Let's just talk about the way a cow or a steer get up. A steer, for those of you for whom English is not the main language, a steer is a castrated bull. So you have steers and cows and bulls and old ones and young ones, and they all seem to get up, at least most of the time. But first, they leave the knees on the ground, and they raise up their butt, and then they struggle up to their feet, or they gracefully rise, whichever. A horse gets up the other way, and a horse can, I have seen one or two horses get up that way. Horses with older horses that are compromised in the front end with a navicular condition or an abscess, sometimes they'll rise up butt first from the ground. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that it's the horse's way to launch into life, to use the hips to propel up and forward. And they can, from a sound sleep, just launch like an airplane straight off at a gallop, out of a slumber, out of a lying down for the evening, and suddenly at a gallop. This is what they're equipped to do. And somehow, between the notion that a horse should always use the forehand and we should always have access to the forehand, between this misunderstanding and the horse's reality is a spot where with some care and some study and some finesse in your approach, you can actually ask a horse to gather himself at a standstill or at a full speed, and you can ask him to become compact, to change his shape at speed, to what we would call gather himself up, make himself higher and more compact with his feet and his body and his capacities more available for the asking. Collection, as Buck Brannaman one time mentioned, maybe many times, but I heard it once and never forgot it, was when collection becomes a goal in itself, when you have as a focus an exclusive target on collecting a horse, often the components that lead to its most natural manifestation and its most enjoyable delivery from the horse to us. It's an offering from the horse to life. When we just rail in there and pound ourselves in any discipline down this path of collection or bust, you will or else, the beauty is lost. It's really lost. Because collection would be something to receive from the horse. Collection would be something that you would ask for and prepare him to offer you, to hi, and he's right there with a hi back. How are you? I'm fine. Are you collected? What does it really mean? Are you ready? That's what I think it means. Are you ready? No, I'm not ready. Yes, I'm ready. Yes, I'm really ready. That feeling does not have to come the way that collection is often presented. It does not have to come in a frame, in a tight, restricted, single interpretation, single aesthetic, single delivery of vertical face, neck bent a certain way, hips engaged, the ability to trot in place or have a smooth, elastic, swinging, elevated back and withers. That may be the hallmark and the representation of collection in many horses at many times. But a truly collected horse may be collected and you don't even know it, because he's ready, he's aware, he's thinking, he's watching. Going through the motions of collection, going through the what has become, unfortunately, the typically accepted frame of collection, which involves usually a lot of practice, a lot of work, a lot of equipment, a lot of preparatory routines and schooling, perhaps overschooling, arguably, in some cases, that may produce something that could help you bring home a ribbon or win favor or applause or high esteem from other people who are struggling to have their horses look in a similar way. But the collection I'm interested in for myself and the horses that I ride and the horses that I help my students to get along with better is that state of readiness. And what I mean by that is that when the state of readiness is the yes energy, it's the energy of yes, I'm ready. I see it. I hear it. Where did you want me to go? Which foot? When? At what speed? When the horse checks back to you. I'm trying now to be careful in my word choices because I realize not everybody speaks English. But when we talk about a horse checking back with you, let me take a moment and explain what that means to me, anyway. By the way, I'm certainly not the last word on any of this, but I have learned a lot about what I don't do and what I don't see producing beauty between the horse and rider. I've spent a lot of time watching people try to collect horses, and I've read extensively back to, military days, many centuries ago, of how people achieve this. And one of the things that is not written about much and not done much because people get frightened is it's not written, that I've seen, that if you don't have something to collect, there is no collection. So when you step up on a horse and you're worried that he might trot and you're really only ready to walk, maybe that wouldn't be the time to work on collection as a student. Maybe the horse can or can't do it is irrelevant for the point I'm trying to make. When you aren't willing or able or mentally prepared for a horse to run, that's when many people say, get him collected. I think what would be an easier way to ultimately experience the best that collection can be is to learn how to ride first. Not how to collect him so that he doesn't go too fast. Because using your reins to slow a horse down does not equate to collection. We're talking about accessing the feet and the body in a way that has an organization underneath you of readiness and the preparation to move any foot anywhere at any speed for any reason at any moment does not have to involve collection. But when it does, it's certainly the more beautiful to behold that, to remember how that looked, and certainly to remember how it feels. But you can do that on a loose rein. You can do that with no bridle also, if you're thinking about where the feet are, and if you're more than thinking about it, if you're knowing where the feet are, if you're feeling where the feet are, and if the horse knows that. And that's really what I want to talk about, is how to get to that point where your awareness of what's happening underneath you is something that you don't need to look down and see. There's nothing wrong with looking down and seeing that. But at the point where you're really training horses to be collected, looking down at your hands and looking down at the horse's face, leaning over and looking in his face as you pull him left and right, this is not going to produce the lightness that most people aspire to. That will produce a heaviness. The looking over, the leaning over, the looking down, the abrupt taking back of the reins to correct or to instruct in the mouth. Well, I thought about putting pictures up here, and I thought about putting a video clip, but there's so many limits to what a picture and a video can present. Right at this moment, it would have made it easier, but I don't want it easy for me. I want to have it this way. Later, I will put up some pictures, this week, in fact. I want the experience and the vision that I'm talking about to be something that is felt as you hear it, imagined as you hear it, and remembered if you've seen it, or if you've seen various attempts to achieve collection that have either worked or not worked in a nice way. It has to be something that's discussable, not and felt. So if we're thinking about where we want the feet, in what sequence, at what speed, and when, with the horse in a frame of mind that is available and ready to, you could say, be at your disposal. You ask, he says where, when, how fast. Not why and maybe or maybe not, but the readiness is the precursor, the first part of the horse being the partner that is collectible. But if you're up there and worried about speed, if you're up there and worried about the horse running off or tripping, or worried about whether the saddle fits or whether he's sound enough, then that's going to distract and detract from your interaction about collection and how to request that. I'm going to explain in detail how I go about all this later, but it's been a process of elimination and a process of 20 years of trial and error or more. When we're on the ground next to a horse and leading him at the eye, right at the eye, maybe blocking the eye, but when we are positioned with our body, between his jaw and his shoulder, rounding him as we hold him at the bit. This has been done for commonly and for centuries in Europe. You flex the horse as you walk him. You have him round in your direction with a flexible pull to the left, round in your direction with a flexible pull to the right. There's a lot of value in that, as long as that is not also the place where punishment and confrontation and actions of correction that produce a heavy forehand and fear and holding of the breath and self-doubt and the unwillingness soon to come forward at all. This is the thing between classic training and what has been, how am I going to say this now? Between classic training and what has come to pass as standard accepted practice for creating acceptable groundwork. What in the world is all this now? I'm so sorry. There's these huge blue signs asking people to come on, and of course you can come on. I don't know what I have to do to make that happen. I thought this was public. Well, I'm going to keep going. It will be broadcast later if you would like to watch it. I hope everybody who's trying to watch this can do it. When you're on the ground with your horse, that is the time to learn how to place the feet. For the rider who jumps up and wants to start taking lessons in collection but cannot lead the horse safely from the wash rack to the paddock or load him in a trailer, for the rider who really has other people doing everything for them except the riding, the real fundamental elements that comprise collection are going to be foreign, and therefore it's like skipping a grade. You go from kindergarten to 4th grade and things will be missed. So I'm going to suggest that if you are riding and training horses in collection and for performance in any discipline, that we start to really look at the way a horse gets up on his feet from lying down. For example, he goes first, pole up, pole, neck, shoulder, rock back, push up, stand up. So when we think about the power that is involved in moving, let's say between 1,000 and 1,500 or 1,600 pounds around, and not tipping over and not having to stagger around or hit the wall on a box stall that's small. The horses have tremendous control over their the transfer of weight from one foot to another, from left to right, and from back to front. So to harness that is to, and harness it without offending or abusing or interfering with a horse's access to his own capacities, is going to require some study and some smarts, human smarts, brains. There's no shortcut to, well, there are shortcuts, but that's exactly what they are, and it looks like it too. So to have a beautifully collected and available, that's the part, horse underneath you is not something that happens by avoiding the foundation for it. And that is an understanding of where the feet are underneath this horse, where they are, how they are moved. If you have, I'll just give you a quick example. If your horse is shod or trimmed in a way that he is landing toe first, toe, center, heel. If he's landing toe first, either because he's got sore heels or because the way his hoof is shaped and shod prevents him from landing heel first, any attempts to collect him, meaning force him to come up and back and to try to be light, will only be an effort. It will be an effort, maybe a heartfelt effort, maybe an educated effort. But to miss the foundation, which is how are the horse's feet maintained? Can he use them the way nature intended? Do you have a horse that has great big shiny patches on the front of every hoof from landing toe first in the riding school or on the hunt field or in the jumping arena? If they have had to change the way they use a 16 or 20 square inch platform, 4 of them, if they have to change the way that works to accommodate the way the hoof care is managed, for example, this is just one small example, then any effort to collect this horse will be at his expense, unfortunately. And to an educated eye, it will look that way. To an uneducated eye, it won't look like anything other than somebody riding a horse and looking like they're riding a horse. But what I'm really interested in, whether you are in the reining or the cutting or just you're a ranch cowboy and you're out getting work done in difficult terrain with difficult animals and difficult people who may or may not understand what was just communicated about what to do with 10 cows that might be going that way, and that was the point. If you can't collect your horse and marshal the capacity to maneuver in an elegant, graceful way with compromising situations developing just like this, the same is happening at a gallop in the jumping ring or in the cutting pen. But the foundation for really being able to communicate to that animal where you want him, when, in what posture, and at what speed cannot be considered an accomplishment, really, if the way the horse moves and the way he's expected to move and the way he has to move are not reconciled so that he can do what you want. So I'm caused for a moment to say, now, because I was talking a moment ago about not looking down, not looking at your hands, not leaning over to look at the horse's eye while you bring his head around from his back. I'm switching subjects here a little bit from the ground back to the saddle, and just try to stay with me, because that's, well, maybe there's a better way to say this, but this is how I'm doing it. When you look over at your hands, or when you're looking down when you ride, if you're looking left and turning left, but you're actually looking at the ground, say 3 to 4 feet off his shoulder, right about where his nose would be headed, you see that's a problem for the horse in terms of his ability to stay light in the forehand while you're looking at the ground in front of him. You think about the way horses run together, and when one looks at the ground, really at the ground, the others want to not step there. So whether you're riding with long stirrups and your feet out front on either side of the shoulder, which inhibits movement and lightness, whether you're leaning over and looking down, and this is assuming your saddle fits. If your saddle doesn't fit and you're leaning over, looking down, and driving you're driving the bars into the top of the shoulder blades, that's also a problem for a horse that is expected to be light and desired to be light and available in the shoulders. The smallest things we do displaces our weight. And so I think the place to start with collection is to recognize it in the horse that is, perhaps, we've probably seen this in movies, and you can see it in any of the breeding establishments where they have, let's say, paddocks on either side of the driveway, and you drive in with a horse trailer, and there's a stud in a paddock and he can gallop alongside. He's galloping in a state of collection and excitement, and really what's on his mind is, hello, who are you? You're in my area now. I'm ready. I'm really ready to meet you. And so they whinny back and forth from the trailer to the pasture, or from one paddock to another when new horses are brought on a place. Some of you will know what I mean. When you notice a horse like that, and even when you think about a horse, horses, when even in box stalls, long rows of box stalls, when new horses are brought in, often, if a mare's in season or a stud is brought in or a mare in foal, many of them will look out in a real state of interest and collection. The animation that you see on them is the animation we want underneath us when we're riding them. So there is a $1 million industry that has developed around the need, for the perceived need, to shorten the time that horses are trained to be in a state of collection, and that's the equipment industry. There are many things that are thought to enhance and to shorten the learning curve, and I don't think that those things work too well, because anything that distracts a horse that would be adding to his confusion about what you mean by what you do. And these things that I'm talking about are things that restrict the jaw, that restrict breathing, that restrict the mobility of the pole, or that force the horse in any way to drop the neck and to bend the neck in a way that stretches and elongates the nuchal ligaments so that the horse cannot really retract anymore and raise himself up in a state of natural balance. When that happens, it's very hard to recover the beauty of his potential to collect for you and to be with you, underneath you, in that state of athletic readiness. The compromises to athletic capacity from a shortcut taken to achieve collection before the ability to maneuver at full speed on a loose rein has been laid in between that horse and rider, or horse and trainer. When you go to that collection for speed control, you see, that's where I think the biggest misunderstanding and the biggest disservice to the horse and to students has taken place. A lot of that has to do with at least the way I see it, it has to do with the stress over show deadlines and pressure from owners, breeders, trainers, and students, from families, and whatever all goes on between people about what they should be able to do with a horse. This does not make it easier for the horse or for the person trying to understand how to get along in the horse's world in a way that he understands, that does not produce resistance or confusion. And resistance and confusion are very close in the horse world, in his mind. Often, resistance is the result of confusion that is unrecognized. It doesn't go acknowledged and feels more personal sometimes. So what I've found is that if you can take the best of some of the, we might call them today, tips or pointers, or really it's the tenets of training, but the classics, the classic riders, and I'm not talking about anybody who's alive today, I'm talking about going back quite some years. I'm going to take pictures of the books that that I have learned from later, and I will put them up very soon. When you had the defense of a nation, or the desire to conquer another nation, as your main goal, and you were riding alongside others and against others who didn't like your goal, none of this could have happened in any type of way that would have ever been recorded in history if people didn't understand how to marshal the horse's capacities to deliver what you want when you want. You can't do any of that without knowing where the feet are. But those were days when horses were not just at our disposal for enjoyment. There was actually a huge job to do. And you can think about, look at the paintings and the pictures and the etchings and the lithography that goes back from hundreds of years to see the way that horses were trained quickly and effectively, because the goal was not submission. You don't get out there and try to fight a war on a horse that is submissive. You need a full partner. So that's the difference between some of these arbitrary show deadlines and some of the quick fix, rush, hurry, bring him around as fast as possible so that he can be collected. It's quite hard to sell a horse in some circles that cannot be collected. But what is passing for collection and what is true collection is a tremendous, tremendous range of facts away from each other. Passing for collection because he's in a frame is enough for many, many people. But that doesn't mean that he's walking properly, or that he's got his transitions right, or that he can have a lateral movement, or that he can breathe. This is the thing that I want to talk about when we start to think about, can you collect your horse? Yes, sure. But whether you're going to tell him or ask him is the first question to ask oneself. The second idea might be, will you pressure him until he yields? Or will you present it so that he reaches for the meaning in your feel with the change you recognize as part of is a component of the collection that you're going to want to ride him in? This is part 2. I'm back, and I'm so glad that there are people on here who are interested in this complex and wonderful subject. Okay, for those of you starting with us right now, the subject is collection and its intricacies, its complexities, its most beautiful and most woeful aspects. I've got to find a way to sit. Some of you may have noticed I got a little eye problem going here. That's what happens when you land on your head too many times. Don't forget to wear your helmet. Let's see now. I was just talking. Okay, so yes, we were talking about whether you ask the horse to collect or do you tell him to collect. And what I would like to talk about now is the anatomy. And it's really difficult, I think, to expect a horse to offer someone who doesn't know what they're asking for what they think they're asking for when they don't understand how the body is hung together. I'm not going to get in depth on this particular discussion without some diagrams too. That's where some diagrams would be very helpful, and I actually have them downstairs. But we'll do that at another time, or perhaps later in the week. I think I'm going to follow this up midweek with some photographs that I've assembled. And as I said in the preceding section, I didn't want to bring photos to this because it starts to create a very limited idea of what collection is. So just to do a quick review, we're talking about a state of readiness, a state of availability, the horse who can marshal for you his or her body parts and willingness to be available when you know where you want the feet, in what order, at what speed, in what direction, and when. Now, that's a lot to know. That's a lot to have on your mind when you're riding. Sometimes people just want to know, do I kick him here and do I pull here? Well, sure, you can do that, and the horse will either understand you or he won't. But to ride at a more educated, a little more refined, a little more knowledgeable level, I think is the goal that many people have. And it's a laudable goal. It's certainly worth pursuing, because the more refinement you bring to that relationship, the more elegance and the more tact the horse can reply with. You can ride from a thought. This is for sure. But to get there, you're still going to have to start with the basics. There's no way around the basics for advanced riding, and advanced riding is a very subjective term. I mean, if you're riding better than you rode yesterday, you are advancing. So let's be sure that we go easy on people when they refer to themselves as advanced riders. I've seen many advanced riders who are advanced from what they were, but the horse wasn't necessarily in on that news. So it's important to be very generous with people when they're describing their skills. The horse is always going to reflect what you know and what you don't know. On the subject of collection and rein control, and there is an overlap there, because most people are not thinking about collecting their horses in a rope and halter. They're not thinking about collecting their horse in a bridleless configuration, or if they are, they, in most cases, help their horses to understand what they meant by collection by using a bridle before that. But the fact is, a horse that is collected is ready and he's available. And that ready and available part is going to be much more, enjoyable, much more useful, much more beautiful to watch if it is offered as an exchange. It's like watching two dancing partners. If people have been drinking heavily and they get out on the floor for some line dance or rock and roll number and they're stepping on each other's feet, that doesn't look too nice. It probably doesn't feel too nice. And yet, there's a lot of riding that looks like that passes without question, because there's this often unspoken dominance part in there that is unquestioned. And this is the thing about wanting partnership and trying to achieve and attain something that is elegant and discussable, astonishing to onlookers, remarkable in every way. It doesn't come from a spot where there is a victim and a victor. It doesn't come from triumph over the horse's will. Many people think that. Many people practice that. But once you've seen and felt the difference, then you know it's two different languages. That's two different things altogether. And I think that if you have in your history been shown, tell the horse who's boss, honey, I grew up listening to that, and to be sure there's some truth in that. He doesn't pay your bills, you pay his bills. Yes, you do need to be in charge of where he puts his feet, but you also need a 15-year-old child who's not in diapers too. So it's how you help that individual horse or child move ahead to satisfy your idea of what real advancement and real progress is. There are children that are lost in the struggle toward maturity because their youth was handled in too rough a way. People spend lifetimes recovering from these experiences, and some make it, some don't make it as well. Maybe some don't make it at all. But once you have a horse involved that you're going to be sitting on to the point, that is the point, because when you have the bottom half of yourself on the top half of 1,000 pounds or more, it sure better be okay with that horse. It sure better be okay, and he sure better be understanding what you want him to do with his feet. I know many people who, I've met them over the years, who have seen demonstrations that I've done or come to public events where lots of other people were also showing things, and also in my private work with people, where it was a surprise that collection had anything to do with where the feet should go, that had to come first. The dominance and the contortions that horses are in many cases asked or told to submit to in order for a frame and an effortless accommodation of body realignment to happen at the snap of a finger. So much of the horse's potential to be athletic is lost in that submission. And this is the thing, that you can never bring that back. Once the neck is bent in the wrong place for true athleticism to be achieved, it's very, very hard to shorten those ligaments up. The nuchal ligament is not one ligament. The nuchal ligament is a whole network that supports the horse's head and forehand so that you can be carried together over obstacles and in ways at different speeds and in different body positions of body alignment that are functional. And once the submission part of what has become modern collection training is worked too deeply into that horse's understanding of how he should be, you can't just shorten those ligaments up and raise the root of the neck and broaden the shoulders again and separate the hips again so that he's standing squarely in a state of readiness. You want to make sure not to take him apart too quickly without knowing how he's assembled. You want to be sure that the way he's responding to you will have future use. And I think it's really important. I think at this point, too, I want to say that I'm going to give you an email address. Ridewell, one word, ridewell@lesliedesmond.com. If you have questions, feel free to write to me. I don't have the luxury of the time right now to take too many phone calls, but if we can communicate over the email about your specific questions, I will also bring these questions back in future discussions if they are, and I'm sure they would be, have appeal and use to other people. I'm going to try to, right at this moment, talk about the way that the rein is best able to help you achieve collection, because knowing where the feet are on the ground and knowing how to slow and liven up the feet without attacking the horse on a lead rope or restraining him so that he doesn't overreact when you do come in with a lot of pressure. I'm going to talk now about how you can work with feel and release to produce the shape and the function that you want in a horse that is still reaching for you mentally. What do you want? Where do you want my feet? In what sequence? At what speed? To get that conversation going through pressure and release and submission is almost, it's at odds. Those goals are at odds with each other, in my experience. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. I just haven't seen it yet. What I have seen is that if you can release the shoulders up, and by releasing the shoulders, it's really important to remember that of the 7 vertebrae, between the pole and where the neck attaches at the front of the sternum, that's in between the shoulders. The base of the neck is protected by the shoulders. Thank God. Or maybe in half a dozen social situations, the poor horse's neck would just break off. I mean, it's well protected. The root of the neck is deep within that shoulder cavity, and obviously on some horses it might be closer to the front than others. The wider, the deeper the chest cavity, probably the more secure many of these necks are in there. But once we are understanding that to really get the neck and pole where we want, you have to be able to elevate the forehand by releasing it. You cannot force the front hand up by compacting the jaw and squishing the neck back toward the pectoral muscles and the forearms to overbend this horse, when what you need is the front end coming up. This is to take both ends against the middle and just wad him up. You might as well throw him out and start over. Because what the result, to my eye, is not beautiful. But to someone who wants a true athlete underneath them. Now, a true athlete is not a horse that just marches around on a tabletop in the show ring. That is not a true athlete. I'm sorry. That's a demonstration horse, a competition horse in that limited definition of that demonstration. But a real athlete is going to be able to pick up his feet and take you somewhere. A real athlete doesn't need a round pen or the confines of a dressage court to prove himself to someone who really understands what that readiness is used for and can be available for. That's the kind of rider I would like to see more of. Those are kind of thinking I would like to see more of in every discipline. Because once you have established a facility and equipment-based limit to your relationship with the animal, there's really nothing wrong with it as long as you're not fooling yourself into thinking that it's something else. And this gets back to the fear of speed and the real fear of horses that many judged accomplished, ribbons on the wall and trophies in cases riders have. Can you take that horse out and gallop him through the woods? Don't do it to please me, but if you can't do it, be sure that you don't put yourself or someone else in a position where it's necessary. Because the limits that are built in to training for the test are limits that unfortunately really impede the horse when you may need him the most, which is to cope with the unexpected, to take you from point A to point B, or you're taking him from point A to point B on the ground, let's say, between buildings or across a facility or from one part of the showgrounds to the other or across a racetrack. All of these things are about the relationship. 99% of the time you're with a horse is not at the show. The quality of that interaction is going to be reflected in what passes for, or what actually is, the ability to collect him and to have him functional and available underneath you for any reason at any moment. So when we talk about the fear of riding, we talk about the fear of speed. I'll get back to something that Ray Hunt mentioned on more than one occasion, and perhaps in more than one way, but the way I remember him saying it was, if you can't run, there's nothing to collect. If you can't let your horse move then there's nothing to collect. Hello doesn't have a lot of relevance if someone's never understood goodbye. You need the other piece. You need the other piece for something to come through in the fullness of its identity. So if you're going to collect a horse at a trot, but you're sitting up there afraid that he might lope, don't mistake in your hand that his compliance with your wishes is collection if all it's actually doing is slowing him down. It may feel like collection because you're not galloping off. He may be in a frame. He also just might be a darn nice horse who knows you're afraid. But to be focused on the collection format and the collection frame before the experience of moving up in the transitions from a slow walk to a fast walk, into a slower trot or a faster trot, up through your gait to the gallop, to not be able to gallop a horse but be focused on hours and hours and hours of learning how to collect him at the trot, to not somehow come clear and clean with oneself about the connection between the focus on collection and the fear of going fast. Once that is something one can honestly do, if it is true for that person, once that's something that can take place in your dialogue with yourself, your relationship to training a horse to collect will have a different look and feel. And the way that that horse is available to you will also have a different look and feel. So I want to talk for a moment about the root of this neck, because it's a very, very important thing. In the structure, back behind your saddle, you have a cross, the horse's pelvis and his spine. And from there, you have his two hips, goes down to the ground. That's the one spot where your combined weight is actually structurally hung together in that cross there at the hip. Everything that happens ahead of that is going to be something that you either add to or that is diminished from his experience of being kept by people. The confinement that most horses are in today changes their top lines very, very quickly. I'm just going to touch on a couple of things that makes it difficult for a horse to collect readily and easily when asked. These are easily debated, and I don't expect people to agree with me. I'm just going to share what I've seen and share with you the changes that I've made in my own care of horses and my own recommendations to my students when I'm asked. So I feed on the ground. The water is on the ground. The feed is on the ground. For a horse to be eating and socializing in an elevated position changes the way he uses his mouth. And when you change the way the horse uses his mouth, it changes the way he can hold himself. It changes the way he moves the pole. It changes the way he can use his neck. Okay? A horse that has his head on the ground when he's eating and drinking has access to the diaphragm. The diaphragm is nature's barrier, let's say, between the gut and all those intestines and that whole mess back in there. I say that because I'm not enough of a student of the horse yet to exactly know what I'm looking at when I see a lot of that. The lungs need to be separated and are separated. There are many diaphragms in the horse's body, by the way. It just means a partition in one way. It's a muscular partition, we'll put it that way. And when you have a partition that is tight, well, I don't know what happened there. The phone rang. I don't know if I'm still on. Are we still here going? It's not a great time for me to be talking at the moment on the phone. Have we? Okay, we're still there? All right. So our choices about how to keep a horse have a lot to do with his availability, physical availability and mental availability. We're just going to talk for a moment the way most horses are kept nowadays in stalls. The longer the nights and the colder the weather, the more standing around they seem to do. And as they stand looking out, for example, there's a lot of weight on the forehand. There's a lot of weight as they push the esophagus and neck and chest up into the gate or the wall, looking left and right, looking here left and right, but not actually accessing the root of the neck. So what we have in some of these living situations where I've seen in Europe many of the horses that stand in sort of a wide enough straight stall that are fed and watered on the ground are in many ways better off than a horse that is fed high out of a corner bucket with water buckets that are 4 feet off the ground and hay that they have to go after as though they're still nursing. There's a real reason that a horse needs to eat with the head down, and that is so that he can see what's going on. So as we change through the way we keep these horses, we change the way they use and rely on their instincts, many things about what's available to us under saddle are affected. And there's nothing I want more in a horse than the availability of his natural instincts when I'm up there. I don't want the element of surprise to take away the life in a horse. I don't want a horse underneath me that's desensitized. I want him sensitized. I want him engaged. I want him available to tell me, hey, look at that. Do we go now? I want him right in the conversation. I want him to start the conversation. When I reply, I want him to have something back to me that is a discussion, whether we're at a walk or a standstill or top speed someplace. That's me. And I know many riders that are good enough. They might not think they're good enough, but I know many people that are really comfortable enough on a horse to push that envelope and give up this focus on micromanaging and micro-control and jerk, pull, kick, switch, make them do it over and over and over and over again until the horse's imagination is no longer available. What I mean by is imagination no longer being available is that once a horse and a rider, for that matter, have been caused to, I'll just put it this way, limit the appreciation of their existence together. They've been caused to scale down the goal to train to the test or train to a point that is so narrow to the exclusion of so much else that's possible, is that the relationship truly becomes just the barest shadow of what it could be. Just the barest shadow. You can think in human terms of the way that interactions are limited by expectations and by various ways of looking at what's possible in life and in thought and in action. We have a world that's full of that at the moment. Many, many different ideas of what's right and wrong and allowed and not allowed. And in some places the sky's the limit, and in some places there's only a limit. So in between all that, the same is true with horses and people. So as you feed a horse up high in the stall, as you tie the mouth shut or tie the head back in or train in draw reins, or in long lines in a check rein, or in an abrupt give and take and pull and kick and make him do it sort of an approach. The release that the horse gets is a very confusing way. There is release in all of that, but it's a very confusing kind of release that does not have in it the understanding of what's really expected except tolerance. It becomes a thing to endure, a thing to dull down to submit to. When that becomes rewarded at international levels or regional and local levels, the limit to what that horse can offer and the limit to what that rider will later know how to do on a horse that is truly ready to do something athletic. Many, many people with, as I was saying, with walls of ribbons and cases of trophies are not able to ride outside of a circle. And that is okay also. I am not knocking it. I am only saying, in mentioning this, that life underneath a horse that can be collected at will can be unlimited. And my goal, whether you're at the local or regional or international level of showing, or whether you're breeding top quality horses for these purposes, or whether you're just running after cows at the local arena, my wish for everybody is to understand how different and how exciting and how freeing it is when you can release a horse to collection. And that's why I started talking about their anatomy and the structure and how you keep them, because the horse that is standing in the stall hours and hours and hours a day looking out, or boxed in, is actually in some ways better, because when they're looking out, they're heavy on the front end and they're not breathing properly, and the hips generally, one falls in behind the other, so they're kind of on a triangle. I'm not saying that it's better to box a horse in. I'm just saying that when you keep a horse in regular confinement and school him regularly in small spaces, a 20-meter circle, 10-meter circle, flying around a round pen, or just on the end of a 20 or 30-foot lead, these limits to motion, limits to alignment, and to traveling straight, going somewhere, for example. Those limits in the experience limit his ability to give you the experience of the readiness that natural collection that is produced by releasing him to it can give you. So how do I do it? Well, I do it the way Bill showed me how. That's how. And I have to say that long before I met Bill, there were pieces of this that I was onto, but I had no idea of their value. And what piece that was the understanding that you could release a horse to slowness by loosening the reins. I had the good fortune to drive horses from time to time when I was younger, and to be on horses that could go very fast and that they would slow down when you loosened the reins. That's a helpful thing to feel and a helpful thing to understand. But for horses that have been taught that pull means go, which starts by pulling them off grass and dragging them somewhere, that's where they learn that pull means go, many of them. But if you can release the horse off grass, and you can release your lead rope in your groundwork down that shoulder groove, and I have apprentices who have learned how to do this. I have many students around the world who've learned how to do this to great effect. And it's very rewarding when you suddenly realize that by pulling on that head, you make the forehand heavy, which is not helpful if you're trying to get a horse's forehand available in a state of collection in forward motion or lateral movements. You want to have that horse available, and if pulling the head loads the front end. How do you rectify that? Where do you go with that? So, as that lead rope or rein goes down the shoulder groove and that horse comes back up to you, that is not the time to snatch the mouth. That's the time just to take stock of how long he can stay with you and what you're going to do with that elevation in terms of using that freedom in the shoulder that he just offered you. This neck that is bent between the second and third or third and fourth vertebrae with the head forced down to the chest and beyond, I don't know what that's called, but it is not collection. It is something else. It passes for collection, but actually it's a certain type of submission. It's a certain type of force that actually restricts the horse's natural abilities and limits what's possible between that horse and rider. And as long as everybody who is in the process of learning that or teaching that or judging that or being judged on how well they do that, as long as they all agree, I'm out of the discussion. I stand back and can only say, if it works for you, that's great. It's not for me to comment. But my comments are generated somewhat reluctantly, I must say. But my comments come from years of phone calls and more recently emails and more recently texts and messages and Facebook posts and a flood of questions about what do you do when you can't get down to the feet on your collected horse. We need to back up a little bit and think, what is most important in all of this? The ribbon? I'm not going to argue with that. Yeah, ribbons are important. Trophies are important. National standing is important. The horse industry is important. Making winners is important. I'm not going to argue with any of that. It's a lot of fun. People love it. It brings prestige and work and income and pleasure to thousands and thousands of people. There's nothing wrong with it. What's wrong is if you get hurt. What's wrong is that an overflexed, overbent horse whose feet you really don't control can hurt you. Without the fence, without the round pen, without the dressage court, without the e-brake, without the perimeter fence, a lot of these horses really are runaways. In fact, I can tick off in my head many training facilities where I've seen horses run off with people. They don't call it that, but that's what's happening. The chin is on the chest. How far more back can you go? You can't. You can't. Once the chin is here and the neck is in a circle and you haven't gotten to the feet and you're up there, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. And you're okay until you're not. But we're not going to talk about how you fix a horse like that. You can. It takes about a year of body work and no riding to do it. And I've done it, and I'm doing it now with several people. I'm figuring out a lot of really interesting things to do to tighten up the nuchal ligament and release the horse to another posture. It is possible, but let's just not do that in the beginning so that we never lose track of the importance of having those feet available mentally and through the feel of it. There's nothing wrong with being led at the walk by somebody so that you can ride with your eyes closed and feel. You get to the point where you can feel whether you're on a horse that lands toe first or not. You get to the point where you can feel which hip is moving, which forehand is moving, which foreleg. All of these things are going to be so appreciated by the horse that has been hurried or rushed into a frame and into the semblance of collection. He knows whether you know where those feet are. He knows whether you're just asking him to say uncle and take that hand behind the back and have it pulled up there until you give in or give up. I'm interested in another type of riding. And I think that if people could see how much of the horse is available to a trainer that is not used. The eyesight is the main thing. The eyesight is the main thing that isn't used to full capacity that I see. And if people can begin their training of the young ones, or right up through even to retraining some of the old ones that are maybe so confused that they're not ridden anymore, or they've become dangerous, or whatever. You start at the tail. You start over. You start in the beginning, or you start over at the tail. That's what the mother does when her baby is drinking. Got the nose and mouth in between her back legs. What's available to her? She takes her lips around and she touches him on the top of his butt, or she scrubbles up his tail, or talks to him on his back or his hip, or caresses his flank with her neck while he nurses, right? Those are his first real... She doesn't have a face-to-face discussion with her foal. Foal's busy back there. Mare will teach a foal to follow by what she does with his hips on either side. And this is really important, to learn what we can from nature about how to go about getting access to the forehand. If a mare can't control the forehand of her foal at 150 feet or 100 yards, then the baby's going to die somewhere. That's what nature would have done. You get your foal too far away and out of reach, you can't control the feet at a distance. So how does she get that control? It's not just by nickering to him. It's by the feel of the connection that is tied to his sight and to her ability to shift those hips so that the forehand is where she wants it, and she can pick up an eye and deliver that foal back to her. That's what I've seen. And so that's how I train. And that's how I've trained, I feel, successfully. Not to any great fancy levels, of course. I'm still working on the basics, and that's where I like to, that's where I have my great realizations, is right down at the bottom, when I see what I've missed, and then all of a sudden way up at the top. Once I get that bottom piece fixed, what used to be a problem isn't a problem anymore. It's a little bit like, I'll explain it like this. If you have a ladder against a barn, and you put a little rock under one piece of it, or a little piece of wood, maybe just a half inch or a centimeter. Say you put 2 centimeters underneath one side of a ladder. If that's an 8 or 9 or 10 meter ladder, 30 feet, 20 feet ladder, you're going to be this far off at the top if you're this far off at the bottom. That's trying to make what do you call it, an analogy there between the foundation in our training and the foundation on that ladder is no different. You miss a fundamental building block in your in the basics, right on the ground next to the horse. And one example is if you only handle him for your convenience on his left side. You will have a horse very soon that is one-sided. The corrections do not easily take place under saddle by the time he's already learned to look you up for 2 or 3 years on the left and to go left and to be with you on the left. You're not going to have a horse that's that easy to manage to the right just because you're pulling his face and using an outside leg. A left leg and a right rein on a horse that's only been handled on the left is a shock. There's not a real easy way for him to understand that. So, as I believe I talked about that in the October and maybe referenced that in the September discussions too, is that if you just jump on your new horse, your young horse that's under saddle after a year or 2 of groundwork, or maybe no groundwork and just a little preparation, but you jump on there on a horse that's been handled only on the left, you use an outside leg, which would be your left leg, to go right, and you're leaning over and looking down and pulling him toward you, it's an impossible situation for him. Almost impossible. because there's no foundation for him to understand, if he's only been handled on the left, that an outside leg in a right turn means bring your body to the right. Because when you handle a horse on the left and ask him to step over away from you for the couple of years before you ride him, at what point is he informed that that pressure, the same place he's always received it, on the left side, where it meant step away, step your hips to the right, at what point does he suddenly have to snap into an obedient profile and a willing frame of mind to understand that that means go right? The horse that's handled on the left is prevented from taking his forehand to the right. So these are small but so important things that I'd like you guys to think about some of these things and get back to me if you want. The examples that I'm going to show you of current training, there will be some photographs, there will be some I'm going to include some photographs and some etchings. I'm going to include some illustrations from books that I'll recommend and take pictures of. I'm going to do this in the next day or two. It'll be right on, I'll put it on as an album under, it'll be an easy reference. You'll find it as a photo album that will reference this November discussion. For the moment, I think there's plenty to think about. I'm going to continue this in December, and at that point, I will also include, I'm going to read your comments. I'll include whatever answers to questions come in at ridewell@lesliedesmond.com. This is just really an introduction and opening to this complex and fascinating topic. It's a complex topic. It's a vast topic, a widely misunderstood topic. But I suppose there are more organized ways to present theory and technique and my observations, but suffice to say, I'm very proud of my students who have learned not to fear speed. I'm really proud of my students that have come in gripping and hauling and pulling and dominating and can now find in themselves that spot where fear can be acknowledged and replaced with skill and confidence and the humility to go back a little bit and find a reason, which the big reason is if you love horses, then that horse will feel it, he will know it, he will show. Your love and respect for him will come through in his body the minute it's available to him. And part of that has to do with not worrying about or feeling guilty about having made mistakes and not having blamed yourself or blamed your trainers or blamed the judge or blamed anybody. This is an amazing thing to not really need horses for our livelihood anymore and just be saddling ourselves with the job of trying to understand them in a working environment that we have to invent. And we keep them at our pleasure and at our disposal in false environments, which, to be honest, does fundamentally change them. Changes what they can offer, it changes their relationships to their instincts, and it changes what we actually have underneath us in terms of mental availability and physical availability, which are they're inextricably combined. They are one thing. So let me leave you with that for the moment. I feel as though I just tried to leave this conversation a minute ago. I didn't succeed. There's so much, but I think there's also only so much that people can take on. I will read your questions and comments carefully. I will assemble something and get back to you midweek. And in any case, this will be posted on YouTube. These two sections here will be edited and put on YouTube. Please get on that YouTube site. I think it's just Leslie Desmond at YouTube. I think that's where you'll find it. If not, write to me and I will give you a link, or we'll get together again somehow. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me and this difficult to explain topic. This is my these green notebooks back here are the negatives that are being edited and culled and shaped for my next books, in case you wondered what these green notebooks were. And I'm going to take down selected volumes from the shelves behind me, and I'll take pictures of them so that you can see who I read and where I get information, and hopefully you'll have time to find some of these books in a library or online. Maybe you can get them to download. In any case, it's been a pleasure. So, here is what I want to talk about. I think I've gotten the picture part of it organized for myself for the moment. I will, unfortunately, I will present this without the benefit of the written word because I don't know how to move it over. So 1 minute. 1 minute. I'm going to get a chair and I'm going to sit down here and let's see if I can, bear with me please. All right, I've been thinking about this all day, how I'm going to explain these things. It's not easy without a horse. If you can just give me 1 more minute. I'm sorry to have you sit there, but just I have to get one thing. Thank you for waiting. All right. So, the day has been full of many thoughts and many people sharing with each other and with me and with whoever else is out there, known or unknown, a shared concern about how best to improve the way horses can experience us and improve the way we can develop a horse to give us and produce and offer us what we need and want without doing him harm, confusing him, or taking too much of the horse out of him in order to enjoy him. I guess I'm going to hope that that's what we are in some loose collective agreement on. Certainly horses that have no more spirit or no more horse attributes left are less than wonderful to be around. I mean, they still are horses and they're easy to be with and easy to love, but it's not why I think most of us are really attracted to horses, because of what they are and who they are, how they are. They get along so well, and it is in such a deep part of them in nature to get along, that I think this is where we often go wrong in our very divided ways of dealing with them. We have an emotional, feeling, needful way of having them in our lives, some of us. Others don't have that at all and just use them for work or for an income in some way and don't have that connection. There's nothing wrong with that as long as the horses are getting what they need out of life. But the place where it gets confusing for the horse in the most obvious ways is when he is expected to be a pet and the object of love and affection, and then also very obedient on the ground, but also a pet and the object of love and affection, willing to take something from the hand and to be close to you, but also know when to get back, know how far to get back, know when to stay back, know when to come forward. All of these are things that we might ask of a child or a friend or a spouse or an employee. The horses, of course, none of these things. So in our fast-paced world, sometimes I do believe the horse gets a bit lost. And maybe we do too. I do. Maybe we also get a bit lost and a bit hurried and a bit quick. Why am I talking about all these things now when you guys bothered to come back on here and hear about what Bill Dorrance told me to do to get collection through feel and release? Because it cannot be considered in the absence of the way we treat them. And Bill was not one to fuddy-dud around and love and mollycoddle and kiss and fuss and hand feed. He didn't do those things. And I'm not sure whether his mare Butte, which is the mare I saw him with the most at the end of his life, I'm not sure whether she had had much of that in her life as a racehorse at the track and her brief career as a polo horse down in Southern California. I don't know how much of that she got, but she probably got a little bit of it because she was pretty nice to be around. She wasn't head shy and she was gentle with Bill, but of course he'd worked with her. I think he'd worked with her for about a year before I met him. And it must have been a lot of work from what he described. But he was very gentle and thoughtful around her, and she was very respectful and caring in her way of moving around him. It was a very touching thing to observe. But he didn't spoil her and he didn't crowd her, and I've never saw him correct her in a way that we might, any of us perhaps, consider a correction. And that was something I paid attention to. I never saw him get after her at all. Maybe he got after her at one point. I don't know. He never mentioned it. But the foundation for the techniques I'm going to talk to you about in the next half hour cannot be considered without the things that I mentioned to you in August and September and October. And so anybody who's looking for a fast little list to make or something that could pass for, in America, we have these things called Cliff Notes, C-L-I-F-F, notes. They're little quick study guides that if you're not a serious student in school, you can buy these little condensed, short kind of cheater books so that you can cram in your head the night or two before an exam and go in and do fairly well. If you were busy doing other things like majoring and looking out the window or majoring in boys or girls or whatever people do in high school besides study. So the Cliff Note version of how do you get into your hands and at your disposal the things that Bill so wanted me to share with you, and mentioned it many times, not just about collection, of course, but in fact, I don't even think he did mention that. He didn't even use the word. He'd say, gather her up or gather him up a little bit. That's the way he put it, but that's what he meant. Just a minute now, I've got this darn phone is losing power, and I have it plugged into this extremely fancy high-tech thing. Now, this is not supposed to be happening, you losing power thing. Hang on a minute, you guys. Well, we'll take it as far as we can. I'll talk fast. The way you handle the feet, the way you actually pick up a foot to clean it or look at it, trim it, wash it, the way you handle the horse's body, the way you move around him in the barn, is not going to be, in terms of feel, much different than the way you yourself ask him to gather up for you, or than the way you ask him to collect for you. These ways of dealing physically and in terms of sharing space and ask versus tell, request versus demand, these ways of being in life is going to be the way you also do everything you do. I think. We are who we are. So that's what I meant about the Cliff Notes, the quick list of things you can memorize to do to get collection right now that will look as though you were born on a horse, or as though, you know, your 3 years of riding and training horses was actually 25 or 50. There's no shortcut for putting in the time, and there's no shortcut for really understanding the way a horse is put together on the inside and the outside. And that's why if you can stand it, you will be farther ahead, I think, if you can go back through some of the things I went into great detail about in August and September and October. And that involves some hours of listening. And I'm not sure how easy that is to do. I think it could be hard to do if you thought that you were going to get the details and sort of the formula or the recipe right now. I'm going to do what I can. This darn thing. I mean, this is irritating. Oh, well. We're just going to take it as it comes. I'll try my best to give you the capsule version. I'm going to try to give you the Cliff Notes. If you start looking and thinking about a horse from his mother's point of view, start thinking how a mare that's loose in a field gets her foal to gather around and come with her without the lead rope. Now, okay, she is the restaurant, so there's that. But there are plenty of foals that will just take off and, the mother, some of those mares are not that sound. They're kind of lame, some of them, and they can't even keep up with those foals. So how do they get that horse to know to come back? How do they do that? And we're not really talking about them waiting until they're hungry. Talking about the ability for that mare to turn her foal the same way you may have heard me talk about or other people talk about. You open your toe and release a lead leg. You release that shoulder. Okay, so you look where you're going and you drop a little outside rein and you open that toe and voila, there goes that lead leg, and you've got your other diagonal to carry your combined weight. The horse will carry your combined weight across that diagonal and you're on your way. All of that ties into the horse's ability to recognize a distraction, a motion. Hey, over here. Anything that is going to be worth responding to is going to be either seen or heard or felt. So when we dull the horses to the ever-present radio or the talking on the phone or the leaf blower and the food carts and the banging of buckets and pails and pots and pans and stuff all through a barn, once you dull them to sound or even systematically desensitize them. I have a book somebody just gave me called Bomb-Proof Your Horse. Maybe we need that, actually. Yes, you can do those things, but what that systematic dulling of the horse requires is that you either get firmer and more forceful. Another way to look at it would be a little meaner or a little uglier or a little more aggressive with your horse to get him to even notice you, which would be unfortunate. Or you raise the bar on your own skill level so that you can handle a horse that's a little more lively, and you can start to appreciate the fact that he's ready when you want, even if you're not. You may be mentally more ready to ride a horse that's got some get up and go than you can physically manage. That's part of getting better. That's part of learning how to ride well. I happen to love tennis, and I happen to not be a very good player at the moment. Maybe I never was. But the only way I ever improved was to play with people who were better than I. So if you want to learn how to ride well, you need to reach toward and get yourself up on horses that can offer you a little more than what you have become very comfortable with. So I mention this because when you talk about releasing a lead, to have access to longitudinal flexion. Now, I know everybody doesn't speak English as a first language, maybe I don't mean to talk down to anybody, but longitudinal is over the top. It's from the tip of the nose all the way over the top to the tail. Lateral flexion would be from left to right and from right to left, so that the horse would be tipping his head left or right all the way down to the root of the neck. Okay, now I'm going to see. Here we have it. Here is the neck. Okay, and there's your foal, and there's your mare saying hello and putting her nose on different sides in ways that will later be very useful, because what she teaches the foal right there with her nose is what you will hopefully be sensible enough to cash in on with a correct use of the release of your leg, not the power punch, not the big kick or the spur. But you see, the foal starts to pay attention when she takes her nose away. He feels it, but he's not going to take his nose out of there just because he feels her nuzzling on his butt. By the time she picks her head up and looks over the other direction, he's already out and taking a look around there too, or ducking between her legs to see what's going on. It's the release that keeps the attention. With people too. When you're released to go, you often are thinking more about a situation or a person than if somebody's trying to hold you in there. It's normal somehow. I don't know why. So, where's collection in all of this? The collection is a myth. There's nothing to collect if you can't be comfortable on a horse that's running. To collect a horse at a standstill is perhaps just instead to be doing something else. Maybe it's just asking him to shape himself in a way that has come to be regarded as desirable. A nice frame, shall we say. That frame is another way to call it, would be a posture. That posture can be perhaps in some cases easier to obtain at a standstill than it is to retain in an upward and downward transition without losing it. All of this requires some practice. It requires knowledge of where the feet are. It requires understanding, never mind about these upside down words now. Just look at the picture, okay? It requires knowing when you're on the horse what it feels like when this goes up and down in response to the way you're sitting here, or in response to the way he is bracing into a hand and his nose may be going out or his head going up while the withers goes down. There are many, many variables and things that go on between the shoulder. This right here is going to be the root of the neck. The base of the neck is right inside these shoulders, and under your withers, right here, is going to be a different feeling than the raising and lowering of the hip, or the raising and lowering of the neck from right here versus right here. So these are small but important things. This is, remember, I'm going to talk more about this in December. I think it's such a vast subject that it's not possible to just make a package of it and poof, send it over there. It's too much. Because in the middle, if I do that, you're going to feel like you're riding an information-packed bronco. You're going to feel as though the information is a bucking bronco because it's going to be too much to manage. So I want to try to lay these things in. How do I take my life of being around horses and just package it in 1 hour when I'm not even in with a horse? This is not easy. But the small things that go into experiencing the release are it's something that you can start to appreciate. For example, if you're taking a burr or something off your dog and you get it off him and he's released to go, you've taken your hand away and he says, yeah, I'm out of here. I'm going to go chase a ball, bury a bone, find a stick, whatever. All of these things we think about in terms of our own society, or hanging up the phone, being done with a conversation, being released to go. the idea that we have to hold a horse back and then kick him to go, which is practiced in every discipline that I've seen, from the gaited horses to the reiners to the equitation and jumping classes. Some of the dressage riders also do this. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's a popular thing. It's a common thing now to see and to do. But honestly, when I was young, when I wanted to go someplace, I just just hung on to the mane and went. I don't know why so few people do that now, but I think it has to do with our litigious society and the fact that in great measure, I remember in the 90s, probably a good 30% of the horse industry, the backyard horse owners and stables and liveries and show barns, were sued out of existence for the smallest. Some big things happened for sure, but some really small, ridiculous little things happened when there were so many lawyers around that were looking for work, and the liability industry was a great magnet for that, still is. So why do I mention it? Because the over-confinement of these horses and the supplementing of these horses and the overbidding of these horses and the excessive routines, which are alternating very extreme disciplined work with periods of 16, 20 hours standing in a barn, 23 hours standing still. This is not normal. It's not normal. And so the responses that we get from these horses become hard to understand. They're not really horse-like, because when you change the environment that is natural for an animal, and then you want a certain type of behavior that you train him to give you, then when you run into the trouble of not getting what you want, and then realizing that the horse you're dealing with has not so many real horse attributes available because they've either been trained or disciplined out of him in a way that make him tight inside. Really tight. And the collection that I'm talking about, and the release of the horse, the joie de vivre, the joy of life, the readiness to do what you want, when you want, at what speed, in what direction, and the way that you want it. All of this is possible. It's very possible. But it's much more achievable when what a horse is left alone. This is the reason that I showed today a little clip of that, I think it was a PRE horse down in Spain somewhere. Could have been Portugal, but I believe it was Spain. I don't remember at the moment. But I showed this little clip. I shared it. It came up today to me from somewhere, and I passed it on because, certainly not because I'm promoting bullfighting or because it's something I want you to give your power to and be upset about and pity the horse and damn the industry. There's all of that. That's all fine. We can have all that on the side as well. That isn't the reason I put it there. I put it there because it was the best timing I could possibly have had to show you what I meant by what I've been speaking about for 4 months now. When I talk about leaving the horse in the horse. That might have been a 7 or 8 year old horse. Certainly wasn't a 3-year-old. Might have been, but I don't think so. Anyway, whatever age that horse was, that was all horse. And I don't think that, if you haven't seen it, maybe go on and have a look. It's on my timeline somewhere. But the reason that I want to show you that is because, to me, that when I talk about releasing a horse to collection, that is the look and the feel and the availability of the whole animal, starting with the mind, that I am speaking about. That's the kind of collection I'm talking about. Not the type where there is a submission involved. There was no submission in that. there was an agenda. There was a release and a life and an availability. There was spontaneous decision making. There was a little trial. There was a little error. There was some playfulness. There was a lot of openness to possibilities. There was an absolutely powerful upward transition capacity at speed and in a turn. There was an equally fast turn in the other direction, an explosive forward motion, and an absolutely square, well-balanced stop, all within a moment of itself. So this, when I talk about riding a well-trained horse that you can release to a maneuver and release in collection through a maneuver or a series of challenging postures and tasks, that horse and what we saw today is about as close as I could imagine to showing you the kind of horses I like to ride and train and prepare. That was the reason I showed you that. So there were some other things that I put up there today that have a bearing on collection and the way it is viewed and valued. There was one little set of still pictures I put up called Going to the Show. It's on there now. I've made it public. You can just go in there and have a look. Going to the show. It was there were literally there were scores of pictures I could have picked, but I didn't want to overload you, so I gave you 4 or 5 or 6. At that show, all those pictures were taken the same day, and what you see there was actually the norm. Regrettably, that was passing for, normal. Head up, mouth open, eyes asking for help or relief, evident discomfort from one or more things, lots of horses moving on feet that were landing toe first, lots of horses that were not using their heels at all. I didn't show that. I just pulled the pictures of the faces. But, if we think about earth sciences, we can think about the elements. I know we have oxygen, or that's a combination of things. It's hydrogen and oxygen makes breathable oxygen. No, that's wrong. That's why I'm not a scientist. I'm thinking H2O, that's water. All right, never mind the science. That's a dumb one. I did have a clear idea about it because I was talking about elements. I'll go back to that science thing. I learned the list of elements and loved science. All those letters that stand for different things, which apparently I've forgotten. But when people talk about collection, it's almost as if it is an element without which you cannot be acceptable, or you can't sell a horse that can't be collected. If you have an absolutely dead, dry sponge from under the sink somewhere, and a quart of milk has just spilled out onto the table, that dry sponge is useless to collect that milk in that moment. There is something that has to happen to that sponge so that it can relate to that job, which means you have to wet the sponge so that it can absorb the milk. Okay? I liken that, and I'm saying that because that is not too different. Here's another message from the phone. To try to collect milk with a dry sponge or a plastic bag is like taking your horse out, your colt or your older horse, on a given day and just saying, okay, we're going to go riding, can I collect you? Well, if he's stiff or just eaten or sore, or the other horses have all just galloped off, you certainly aren't going to collect anything except your disappointment, because the horse has to be ready to collect. The state of readiness, that I'm talking about is for him to be mental availability that is required for a horse to be physically available is something that goes by another name, and that's called a relationship, a connection. It's very hard to be in a family where the relationships are strained. It's hard to be married when the connection gets too loose. It's hard to raise a child that doesn't want anything to do with you. It's hard to feel important by someone who walks out and closes the door in the middle of your sentence, for example. And when the same type of thing is happening between a horse and a person, what most of us were taught to do is firm up. Be the boss. Play the heavy. Make him do it. You can't make anybody love you. You can demand his respect. You can scare him into submission. Pain is intimidating. He knows what hurts after he's felt it a few times. You can see it on the faces of all of the horses that I showed there today, except the one that was running around with that bull. It's not to say he doesn't know it in other parts of his life, but he certainly wasn't in any pain right there. So, to get this elusive concept, this fantasy for many people, a fantasy of riding, effortlessly riding a mentally and physically available horse in a enviable state of collection. I would say let go of the fantasy and look at what you've got in front of you. How much weight, how much pulling, how much pressure, how much weight does it take to pick up his foot? Let's start just with that. If we don't start with how you pick up his foot in the barn, the availability of his feet in your hands, on the reins, talking to him through the bit, into the brain, down through the body, depending on what's been done with him or how you are attempting to ride him, what equipment you've used in the past and are using now, you may never get to the feet for the amount of stuff that is in the way. Many, many things are draped over these horses' bodies to prevent him from getting access to his feet. His unrestricted access to his feet comes in the form of many things, from nosebands to martingales to the length of a shank on the bit to the tightness of the chain to the metal headstall to the all kinds of stuff that they bury in the equipment, and all of it. The tightness of this or the severity of that, all of that is about shortcuts to the gratification that people feel or the accomplishment that people feel when they know, and I'm quoting this, that they are in control. Knowing that you're in control is not the same as feeling well served by a partner, is it? When you're well served by a partner, you don't wonder whether you're going to be dragged by the foot when you hit the ground at a lope, because on a real partner, you won't be. Before you've hit the ground, he'll be stopped and trying to figure out how to put a little bit of slack in your leg, for example. I believe I mentioned an experience I had like that on a horse in Sweden about 9 years ago. Anyway, I'm going to encourage you to listen to some of the earlier recordings to familiarize yourself with at least the road that I went down and the things that I learned in order to be prepared to tell you about some of the techniques that I'm going to talk about now. I know, get to it, Desmond, get to it. Got your pen ready. It can't come out like that. It starts with that foot that you're pulling off the ground. So what you want to think about is when you approach a horse in a stall, is he ready to stand on that leg harder, or is he getting ready to shift the weight to the other 3 legs so that the one you're near can be light enough to extend in your direction, okay? If you're at a point where you feel like you can ride the horse in collection, but he's just a pain in the butt about giving you his feet when you're trying to groom. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. This is the next part. I had a horse colic last night quite far from here, so that was the 3rd call in 10 minutes, and I just, I was getting too anxious to ignore the call a 4th time, so sorry. Anyway, if the feet require negotiation, that's a good way to put it, I think. If it requires negotiation with the horse to have access to his hooves, if it requires negotiation to get the bridle on, if it requires micromanaging or dominance, if it requires hand-fed treats and little tricks to get the tack on, to get him to follow you, I would say that it's too soon to consider collecting him. It's too soon to consider confining him more under saddle. Putting a horse in a frame that doesn't want you to have his hooves or doesn't understand that offering you the foot is something foreign. He can't offer you the feet under saddle if you have to grab them from the ground when you're standing with him. So the first thing to do would be to begin to handle your horse to some degree the way the mother does. To begin to handle, I gotta get this writing off here. To begin to handle the horse from the back to the front. Start your affection procedures right there on his hips. Love on him back here. Let him bring his head around and see you. That will be a lot better than trying to tackle his head to get the bridle on or force him to let you kiss him. We do that stuff to please ourselves, and it's an expensive indulgence. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of other things here now. This has to do with, let's see what I had here. Yes, here we go. So when you're, let's see how I can do this. Let's see. I'm going to do this way. So when you're standing here, yes, you're standing right here behind him. It is possible here for him to wonder where you are if you're not touching him. I would touch him on both sides of the tail. And if you're afraid he's going to kick you, you get over that fear before you start this. Okay, so you can stand right up here with your chest right at his butt, and you can wrap your arms right around his hips if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. You just work your way up to that. If you've got a horse that's a little bit spooky about that and jumps a little bit, just get him used to it, one side at a time. You're going to work your way across here. Now, all these little dots on here, all these little marks, these are supposed to be flies. Now, I put those there for the reason, obvious reason, that a horse can take care of his own flies all the way back to here. So the idea that he can't turn when you're on him, that he is not possible to collect because he hasn't got lateral or longitudinal flexion, that's probably not the case. It probably has more to do with the presentation. So if he can bring his head all the way around here to get the flies, he certainly, as you move to the right, to the left, or move to the right, he certainly can start to take an interest, and he will do it over here by just shifting the root of his neck a little bit, shifting his head to the left or to the right in your direction and saying, hello, hello. And now you've stepped out of the blind spot here. You've gone from here to here or here, and he's going to meet you here and here. This is the beginning of having him respect and understand the movement of your arms and your feet when you're on his back. If you have 2 or 3 years to practice this and incorporate some of this knowledge and some of these exercises into your relationships with your younger horses 2 and 3 years before you ever get on them, then you don't have to worry about the left and right leg and hand aids when you're on his back, because he'll already know them. So that's why this doesn't just get learned and memorized in a weekend and put right into the horse you're on that might be 7 or 8 or 10 and have had either an unknown or known background, but maybe as many as 10 or 15 different people riding him and 4 or 5 trainers that had different ideas about perhaps everything. So the good news for us is that the horse lives right in the moment most of the time, if there's still enough horse left in him. And what I mean by enough horse left in him, I mean if he has enough healthy aspects of his life that has to do with enough room to move, enough other horse friends, enough time in nature. Being closed in a barn, breathing fumes from urine and manure and fly spray and, the long-term impact of supplements and artificial feeds and supplements and hand-fed candies, this goes a long way over time to reducing what the horse can actually offer you. This will sound odd, but I believe it anyway. But when you change shampoo, when you come in from the hairdresser, when you have a new cologne, when you've just had your nails done, all of these things, they have to process, because that is what their world requires them to do. That's what their biologic imperative requires them to process. Sound and smell and sight and vibrations in the earth and intuitive impressions about the life around them. The world that we provide for most of them is so drastically different than the world they would normally inhabit that as they begin to adjust to the dulling effect, they are also dull to us under saddle and in our company. I think it's important not to take that personally. I think it's important when you ask a horse to pay attention to you that you do it in a way that would be similar perhaps to the way you would want someone to say, hey, look over there. Hey, are you with me? Hey, did you see that? Excuse me, I was just trying, excuse me, did you hear me? You might have to look a while before you'll see people be that subtle. But if you want lightness, and if you want a response that is going to be the type of thing that will just be a secret between you, start to offer that. You're going to offer information to the horse at about the level that you're going to want it back. And instead of firming up and practicing a systematic impatience so that he too learns impatience, start slow, end with a roar, scare the horse, dull him out, get him just ready for the worst all the time so that you have to come in with the worst every time. That type of program really limits what a horse can do for you. And it also limits the ability to appreciate the refinement that's possible. I'm going to talk now just about handling the feet, because I'm going to be very specific now about these horses that are tough to give a foot. Some of the toughest to offer the feet are the ones that have been taught to load the forehand and disengage the hips in one direction or another. When we want to ride a light horse and we want to experience that lead change or that piaffe or that leg yield and that expansive dancing lateral work that is just like being swept away on a little breeze, you want to experience that, then the components of it have to be visited regularly. They have to be known, and then they have to be revealed by you to your horse in the small things you do with him every day. Okay? That's true. That's true. Because if he sees you coming and starting to bend down toward a leg and suddenly puts himself on a triangle and lifts that leg for you, and you've only just reached down and not even touched his leg, that is the readiness that I'm talking about. That is the readiness. Those small bits of preparation that Bill called the smaller particles of feel. You see, the ride of your dreams has to come in the smallest slices of each day when you have that minute to say hello to him in a way that doesn't involve putting that social, intimate, potential connection on a schedule where you march right in to get her done because the feed has to go, get over, okay, back, get out of my way. When those things happen too often in a horse's life, he doesn't really meet you at the surface anymore. He's down below. He'll leave his body there because he's there. He's where you put him, hopefully. He's where you last had him. But when you incorporate a certain type of brusqueness or a certain type of casual mistreatment of his trust and hope that you are as important in your own mind to him as he feels that he would like to be to you, when that's not available between you, it's not going to suddenly pop into the foreground under saddle. And I don't mean extra rubs and extra loving and extra crowding and muzzling. I'm talking about mostly the respect for the silence that you share when he can let his air out and know that it's just okay to be there. Just to be there without having to do something or to obey or prove something or be corrected so that there's been some sort of change or shift in the status that will let a person know that they did. I just put a little piece of writing that came to me on the bottom of the last two comment sections from earlier this evening, because I realized that it's very easy and uncomfortable. It's a common thing that people do, and it's an uncomfortable way to feel, and that is to worry about anything. To worry about whether your horse and you are doing what the neighbor and his horse are doing. To worry about what your friends think of you and your horse and your progress, all of that begins to deeply affect the way we pressure ourselves to define success and to use an external yardstick which is absolutely irrelevant to through which to look at the horse who depends on you for his livelihood, okay, but mostly also his confidence and his self-esteem in your presence. So the reason that I'm mentioning this, and the reason that I often encourage people not to collect their horses at all, and not to pick up a soft feel at all, is because in order for the soft feel that has been made into something of a household word, and good thing it was, by the way that Tom and Bill and Ray and Buck and many others who have learned from them have I don't want to say popularized, that's the wrong thing. That's not the right emphasis. They have promoted its use as a way to, a segue into a lighter type of handling of the mouth that it does not always, and in fact rarely, leads to what I consider true collection unless many other components are added to it. The horse that is routinely asked for a soft feel, but whose neck and withers are sunk down and stuck between a narrow shoulder blade, and by narrow I would only mean narrow due to the use of saddle that might not fit well, or a saddle that does fit well that's ridden by someone who continually leans over and looks down at the horse in the face, or continually leans over and looks down at the spot on the ground where the horse is about to step, or at their hands, or has bad posture with the feet sticking out past the shoulders. The soft feel where you bring up a kind of buttery response to the request for that horse to feel back to you by when you take the reins. You can feather the reins in your fingers or move your arm back at the shoulder a little bit. People do this in many ways, but when the horse bends at the poll to offer you that nod of the head, its usefulness, I don't know that in a 2 or 3 or 4 day clinic you can tell actually 20 or 30 people how to make use of that, even if they do understand how to achieve it in a technical way. The collection that I'm talking about starts from back to front. The head nod in too many instances becomes what I call an empty head bob that is an automatic response, which in the horse's mind just guarantees that you won't ask too many more times, or that you're just gonna kind of let that rein back out to him. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but to misunderstand that means he is collected, or that he will go where you want at speed because you can achieve that. It's something to be careful about what you actually think you have in your pocket to take out and use later just because your horse can do this. The structure that renders that a valuable tool and a valuable component of a bigger picture starts with his ability to lower the hip, which starts with his ability to give you a right hind foot for the asking without objecting, without fighting his hooves. The number of people that are out riding and showing horses that are bad on a right hind foot is astonishing. So it starts really with how you ask for and receive a foot. So you want to receive that horse in a state of offered life so that his willingness to have you collect that life is no more of an effort than to offer you a foot when he sees you coming. Knowing that when you lean over and approach the right hand hoof with your arm outstretched, he wants to be putting that hoof right in your hand. I want that same feeling in my fingers to have 4 feet, like having a 1,000-pound marionette. Now, the reason that I discourage people from pursuing collection as a goal in itself is that that's what I mean by that chasing a fuzzy, contradiction-riddled concept of collection down an endless rabbit hole until you have a stuck horse and a stuck concept and a completely tuned out, shut down sort of a relationship that is probably more rooted in tolerance of each other than the joy, as I said before in my limited French expression, the joie de vivre, of joy of life, the living, the love of life that you want, that is, that the picture of that horse and that bull elicits from us. Okay, there are other things that people get upset about, and I certainly didn't mean to disturb people with the implication that a guy is going to ride that horse around a bull. I want to emphasize that that horse was not put out there as a sacrifice, but by God, you don't want to be around a horse. You don't want to be horseback around cattle if your horse has never seen cattle, if you have a specific job to do. I mean, the horse has to have exposure to the environment before he's going to understand your request for any maneuvers, and that's whether you're at a team penning or a ranch branding or anything else. This was really purely, I want to emphasize this again, I wanted to inspire you to imagine sitting on a horse like that, not get all sidetracked and digress into the ethics and politics of inhumanity to man and animal and all the rest. I mean, you don't have to look much past the nightly news to be puke sick about what people do to other living things. So that was far from my point. And the endless rabbit hole, the futility of chasing this fuzzy concept that, well, he can do it. Well, she's only had her horse 5 months. She's doing it. She's doing what? It's like pretending to understand that you know what two people talk about. It may look to you like someone is sitting on a horse that's in a frame, considering what you might think a frame is, or what someone told you a frame is, or you saw it in a book, or your teacher's a top international rider. Whatever your frame of reference, it doesn't matter, because between a horse and rider, no one knows what is taking place. You live with 6 people in the house. Do you really know what each of them exchange between each other? No. Half of the time, in my experience, in my connections with people that I care about and admire and have long-standing connections with, I'm embarrassed to say half of the time, we don't agree on what took place or what we saw or said or meant to each other 10 minutes ago. I mean, it's not to imply, a strategic dysfunction. It's just that the screen through which we view the things around us, including our horses, is the screen through which we view ourselves. So the clearer that can be, the better and sharper and more distilled your relationship with your own strengths, particularly, and the knowledge of your own weaknesses and acceptance of them, the better that is, the clearer and lighter you feel about being you, the easier it's going to be for that horse to understand what you mean by what you do. The idea that we're going to correct a horse because he doesn't understand us means what was presented wasn't clear. So I'm going to move off that point of making things clear, not so unclear that you have to correct the fact that your presentation wasn't clear. Correct you. Don't correct the horse for trying and not succeeding at understanding what you meant. The horses, as I said before, that are exposed to daily changes of personal odor, personal chemicals, choice of what to eat, the idea that you're going to go and breathe a mouthful of French fries breath into the nostril of a horse and have a deep experience. Maybe you will. Did you also have mouthwash in there? Were you also wearing lipstick? Did you also just spit out a wad of chew and have, whatever? This myth about how, there are many myths about how horses expect us or need us to be to flourish in this man-made environment. I mean, if you look at the art, well, let's start with Phil Tognazzini. His etchings are amazing. But let's go back to Ed Beaurain or Remington or Charlie Russell. The art, Will James. In those days, the horse was met more or less on his terms, in his environment, on his turf. And so the Indian that was going to end up in the middle of a stampede of buffalo looking across at 20 or 30 other guys riding horses that were put together and built and thinking and moving, just like the horse you saw in that clip today. And they're up there with a job and an arrow and a bow and maybe anywhere from 4 days to 3 to 6 weeks with that animal and no saddle. And the horse knows where to position himself and when to stop. We don't know how many people lost their life trying all that, but the fact is, there was enough art and enough folklore and enough true stories and enough fiction and enough written and said and taught and passed down about how native peoples here made great use of horses because they were willing to take the time they needed to take to let that wild part of themselves meet that wild, trainable, tameable, useful part of the horse that he is willing to offer you be available to him. And what that means is that in the moments where we walk in mad and we're on a timeline and we're hurried and got other things on our mind and the kids didn't do that and they're late and the check didn't come and da-da-da and it's raining and the list goes on and suddenly, you got 10 minutes with the horse and suddenly he doesn't get it and you get mad and you have whatever sorts of arguments or fights or discord or things go on that are based in different species in different frames of mind on different schedules with different ideas about what is needed to get along. I mention this because you can't just slap in there with an idea that you're going to teach your horse collection any more than you're going to teach him about lead changes. Horse is born knowing what self-carriage is all about from the day one. He knows how to swap a lead out there in a rainstorm to keep up with everybody else over the rocks when he's 30 hours old or younger. So there's a certain begging I'm going to do now for taking ourselves, myself included, down a bit in the, just not putting yourself down, not diminishing yourself by no means, but just go easy. Just slow it down. Don't worry about what anybody is thinking or what you should have your horse doing or if you're keeping your horse alone, how you failed to keep him in a herd or you bought a Mustang and you don't know one end from the other. Credit yourself with having a good heart and the best intention and slow down enough to put the pieces of the puzzle together the way you did if you ever took the time to do a box puzzle of 1,000 pieces on a summer vacation when you were a kid. And if you haven't ever seen a box puzzle with 1,000 pieces, you can imagine it. It's a time-consuming pain in the neck, but when you're done, you feel wonderful. You put that last little interlocking piece of, multicolored blue sky and a little fragment of an oak leaf, and bam, you're done. And you know, what you started with was 1,000 pieces of a mess. And that's where we are a lot of times when we go to the barn and when we have the horses in places that don't fit them. Had a horse that colicked seriously last night. He's never lived in a barn. 20 odd years old. So, you know, I'm as guilty as anyone for trying to, you know, put a shoe on a foot that doesn't fit when it comes to horses. I just did it last night. I have him in the wrong place. Right people, right place for all the horses there. Not the right place for a horse that doesn't want to be in a barn. His stomach doesn't lie. So these are the kinds of things that you learn as you go, and you'd think after as many horses as I've been around and cared for that I would know better, but so you live and you learn and you keep going, and just take note that there is a beginning and a middle to all of this. And if you're really, really in tune and in line with the objectives that I think a genuinely effective stockman or stockwoman, horseman or horsewoman is going to have, is that there is no end. There can be no end if you're really in this at the level where the horse needs you to be. It's a process. So that's why I'm suggesting we start with the feet and start with the back and get so that you can actually step in behind that horse with your hand on either side of his rump and just peek over and see if he has any interest in you. So don't do it when he has his head in a grain bucket and get all tweaked out that you're not important, because he's got his head in a grain bucket. You're going to ask him and do these kinds of things when he's not in crossed eyes. If you got to do it when he's tied, have him on a long line, or have him tied above his head so that he can, long enough above his head so that he can swing his head and neck in both directions without tripping himself up on the long enough lead rope, too long a lead rope. There are lots of things to think about, but basically, and you know, I don't know really who I'm speaking with at the moment. You wouldn't do this in the middle of a tsunami or on the coldest day of the year when the wind comes up. I mean, you have to set yourself up to succeed so that you can begin to lay in the small successes that lead to the bigger part of an evolving, emerging picture where you can decide whether you're going to collect that horse and marshal his energy and his capacities and his athleticism for a specific task or just for the heck of it, or whether you're going to decide someday just not to shut him down when he self-collects underneath you, instead of getting scared and deciding that he's too spooky or too large for you, and then just try to pound it down into nothing because you could. There are many horses that offer collection and self-carriage and a graceful elevation and sort of a, it's like having mercury in your hand. It's a fluidity. It's a divide and separate and regroup and explode and come back together sort of thing. I mean, that horse we saw today is like the way the dentist used to put the mercury in your hand to play with. It's when you, if you are inspired to ride that, you probably don't need to learn how to collect a horse, because if you can ride that, he is collected. That's what. You just go with him. That's what's meant by, if you can't get that horse to get with you, you get with him a little bit. And then he sees what it's like, that feel of you with him. He can feel and sense when you're with him. And I'm not talking about little tricks to pet him and make him stretch down and I don't know what all. It's turned into something that's just so far from what horses need and are in many cases. People send me books all the time that are hot off the press, and honestly, they're full of such recommendations that I think if a stall door were open, the horse would leave and probably never come back on half the stuff that's suggested, including getting him hooked on sugar. That you can do yourself a favor, and if you're planning on keeping a horse for a lifetime, I just think I'll mention all the cookies and sugar treats and candy apples and all the stuff that are sold to entertain your horse and hand-fed treats. You can just count on a nice dose of Cushing's at the end of all that. And you add that to your sweet lifetime of sweet feed, and the heartbreak at the end when they're raised that way. That's an aside. Let's throw that one out. Okay, so now we're going to talk about your well-educated neck. So what comes next? We've got our hips you can touch on both sides. You've got your head that will come to you on either side. You're now, I hope, not going to frustrate yourself by trying to figure it all out from this episode right here tonight. Go back through August, September, October until you're sick of me, and try to get those pictures in your head and some of that practice into your relationship with your special little friend. They are lovely, aren't they? So you're going to move from back to front just like the mother does, okay? And you're going to, instead of like slapping them around like that and always putting these fingers in here like this, don't do that maybe. Summertime, under the belly or between the legs or on the chest where all the bugs are and stuff, okay. It's winter where most of us are. You know, leave this for something else. Do that to your friend or do it to your dog. Just use the mother's relationship with that foal. If you don't know what that looks like, look at some clips of it. Look at the way a mother will just push her little whiskers next to an ear. They don't need big contact. They need the feel of that closeness. Bill used to use a term, he'd say, ride him close. He would tell me that. What he meant was not collect him, but feel of him until, this is so hard to explain. Feel of him through your equipment and by staying out of his way. You feel of him by staying out of his way, not by bothering him with who you are on his back. Did I say that right? Yeah, probably. And Joe Walter's a good one to watch and to listen to. He's got great vocabulary and great teaching skills when it comes to describing and understanding the way that Bill got the point across. There's a lot of that in Joe, and he's really gifted, really skilled. Wow. So, you know, there's that. But to try to sit here and explain this, I mean, I have to do it because, you know, people have close calls all the time, and I'm no exception. I would never forgive myself to cork off and not share what I can, when I can, as I can. And so you're going to start to think about the way a horse will anticipate your leg coming off him. So if you've kicked him, or you've had your rope swinging and tagged him in the rib cage or the flank on the groundwork left and right, you're going to know that he's ready right at the rib cage for whatever's coming. There's nothing wrong with that. But just to understand that if he feels your leg coming out, he knows what's coming. So maybe just pull your punch and release him to go. Because if your legs come away, or one leg comes away, he's going to tighten waiting for that leg to land, isn't he? He's going to grab that diaphragm, hold his breath a little, and try to figure out whether that means move over or go. And if it doesn't mean move over or go, whether you got off balance, got stung by a bee, whether you're angry, whether it's a mistake, there are all these things for a horse to try to sort through before he responds. And if he's caring about you, and he hasn't been too mixed up by you or your trainer, or before you met him, if he hasn't been too confused, he's not going to jump to a conclusion about your bad intent, because they, by nature, are forgiving. That's what I've seen. So you'll make your decisions about releasing him to go, and you can do it when he's saddled from side to side by taking your stirrup up and dropping it on him, or make sure that you have, if you're going to do that, don't let him run into a short line. You'll take a coil on your that's why I like to have people have a 25-foot lead. I used to make 30-foot leads available, but that's just too much rope. Unless you have a riata or something, you can use can use 60 feet with a Readiness. It's just it's different like that. But it's just lead rope material. 25 feet is about max. But anyhow, you can tie that. You can have a couple of coils ready, and so when you pick your stirrup up, you can get him used to stepping over, just on the release. So why are we talking about groundwork and stepping over? Because I'm not talking about stepping over behind and catching him up short so he buries that shoulder in the ground. You're going to have to re-educate a lot of these horses to liven up on your opening rein with a shoulder that is following his nose, which is following your hand, which is not moving away from something that is coming into his body. It gets into the come here so I can hit you so you can be sure I don't want you here thing. We've got to be well beyond that before you start to free up a shoulder at a gallop off your opening stirrup. You got to be far away from wanting him to do a one rein stop from the ground. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but that's not the same lesson, and to do these lessons back to back and side by side is going to be very confusing. So, what I'm talking about and all the components that lead up to what I'm talking about, which is how do you release your horse to collection, the components to that are basics. But if your understanding of the basics was a strictly pressure and release deal, you're going to have to do some little soul searching, a little muscle memory modification to, swim around a little bit in that no man's land until you redefine the type of feel that will suit the two of you better. Now, don't go getting all depressed, for God's sake. Don't go and feel like you've missed the boat, or it's too late, or you learned wrong, or you got to call up your teacher and bawl them out, or burn your last set of videos you paid for. This is not what this is about. This is going to be what you add to what you already know. If you learned things that were so bad already, I guess you probably wouldn't even be here. There certainly are plenty of people like that. Some of the wrecks people get into, they don't come back from. So they didn't, those mistakes you haven't made, or you wouldn't be listening to this. So it can be that bad. So you just start to experiment. That'd be your main idea. And then start having a little more confidence and get all the negative self-talk and all of the critiques that you've been running in your head about how little you know and all the stuff that went wrong and this vet and that farrier, and if it hadn't been for this one and that one. Get the blame game out of it 100% completely. If you are still kind of stirred up about things, just put it on a piece of paper and stick it over there. That's the best way. It's a way. Maybe it's not the best way, but for me it's worked from time to time when I've been preoccupied with things that didn't seem right and that I didn't want to let go of. But until you make room for what the horse needs you to be thinking about, it's going to be pretty darn hard to really take in what I'm talking about. And I think it's in most of us to be able to do it. I've heard it said you can't teach feel, and I disagree. Bill disagreed. How can you tell a 93-year-old man who spent the last 5 years of his life writing that book that you can't teach feel? Why in the world would he have bothered, and why would he have roped me into it? You absolutely can teach feel. The question is, are you teaching it to someone who's ready to learn? That's the question. I mean, a horse will teach you to feel. I one time in Gunnison, Colorado, got there in the middle of the night. I had the darn dogs, I was on the mountain right above Gunnison. My darn dogs had pulled the brake assembly out of the side of my pickup, and so I ended up with 3 horses coming down that ungodly set of switchbacks 10 o'clock at night, and I lost the brakes on a full trailer. It was really a bad one. I'm telling you this for a reason, because it took me several hours in 4-wheel drive, and a couple of times I just jackknifed it right into the mountain to give myself some time and reposition the rig on the road. It was really one of the worst. It was one of the worst drives I ever had. When I got down there, I found the fairgrounds and put my horses up, and I probably only had a couple hours sleep. And when I got up, what woke me was there were some guys training racehorses in this little bush track, and they were Hispanic riders and horse owners, and tough, really tough, and fun and funny, and they were serious. They had a race to train for, and they had the nephews, the grandfather and a couple of his nephews and one son, and well, the whole gang was there, and they were training that morning. It was cold. My horses were still in, and I looked out, just pulled the wheel curtain out, and I was looking through there, and I saw the darndest thing. They had these young thoroughbreds, and a couple of them were going to be ponied. They were getting ridden for the first time. And here's how they did it. I think one was the second or third ride, but one was for sure the first ride. So they've already ponied these horses, and for those of you that may not understand what I mean by pony them, they had already trained these youngsters to be led alongside another horse. So then, sure as can be, they put these teenagers up there, strapped their legs together right underneath as if their legs were a girth. They just, boy, in one move, threw them up there, strapped those legs together, and off you go. And that was that. Now, why am I mentioning it? Because those people had figured out in that set of goals, we want to ride and train and raise winning racehorses in these little bush tracks out in the middle of the Colorado high country, high desert. They had to get with the feel of those horses. And if you don't have barns and tack and gear and wash racks and all the amenities and the hot walkers and the round pens and the gallop tracks and the exercise people and all of the stuff and the money to bankroll it, you put your kids up there, tie their feet underneath there like a cinch, and you take that horse out for a good gallop, and he learns how to carry somebody. And it was very interesting. I learned a lot. I stayed there the whole day, and I watched many horses ridden it. Some have had 2 rides. No, well, one was the first ride. That was a little exciting. But nobody got hurt. They just got with the feel of that horse and let that horse go. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because if you don't have something to collect, don't start on collection. The components of collection are going to start with the availability of the legs and feet and the root of the neck, and the shoulders being uncompromised enough so that the wither doesn't disappear down with a locked neck and an empty little head bob at the top of a broom handle that just does this. We're not interested in collecting the pole because the whole animal and you with that animal is the deal. And what you do with the life that comes up and how you are going to manage that life is going to be very confusing to you if you're trying to teach a horse and yourself about collection if you're not able to get up there and really lope out on a loose rein or be ponied at a gallop. In my riding school back in New Marlboro, Mass., which was many years ago in the 80s, I had a riding school there, and I offered 2 things: beginning grooming and tacking lessons for adult beginners and power rides for kids. And a lot of kids wanted to come and ride with me in those days because I was the only horse place around. So there'd be a slew of kids on bikes after school down there, and we'd go out for a gallop. And they were bareback with a handful of hair. That's the way my father taught me. That's the way I taught them. And it works. And once you don't have a fear of speed, then you don't really misunderstand what the reins are for, because they aren't for balance. And if you're going to turn a horse at speed, it's really important to remember to look where you want him to go not where you're afraid to fall or where you're afraid he might step if he is going to go resist your plan and fall into that quagmire. This is what I'm talking about, down the rabbit hole of self-defeat and bad impressions and negative expectations. If you're ready to really collect a horse and mean it and offer him something that is going to stay with the two of you, you can't be afraid of speed. No. I've seen Ray Hunt pull bridles off, ropes and halters off horses where people were hanging on there in the colt starting classes back in the 90s and early 2000s. That whole 10 years of, well, there were clinics all over the place. Colt starting classes every time you turned around. If it wasn't with Ray, it was with Buck. If it wasn't with Buck, it was with Tom or a lot of other people out there who were picking up on the true treasures and the true gold nuggets that they were passing out every weekend. All over. You could drive 3 or 4 hours and have a 4-day event somewhere, you know, a couple times a month. It was amazing. It was really amazing. And what was amazing was watching that Ray wasn't kidding. If he was going to come and take a rope and halter off your horse because you were pulling, there were plenty of people that got mad and got off and went home. Well, that was maybe better. But if you're really putting the bottom half of your body on the top of half of a 12 or 1,500 pound horse, it's really important to understand whose world you're in. And if you want them to join you in their world, and you're not part, you want them to join you in your world, and you don't know much about their world, then you oughtn't be trying to sit up, get astride of a colt. The less you know, the safer and better and happier you'll be with a horse that knows more about your world than you know about his. There's no diminishment in that. There's no shame in that. I'd really like to have a chat with about 1,000 people I know of who make their living selling 2-year-olds to first time out of shape, overweight adults who've had a fantasy of owning a horse since they were a kid. Now they got a 2-year-old. You know what? That isn't fair. It isn't fair. It isn't polite. It breaks down horses. It breaks human hearts, and it busts people up too. Good money for the breeders and the trainers, though, and I don't mind saying it. I've been battling that for years. It's not fair. It's not fair. If you want to really learn how to ride and you really want to be competent, don't get a young horse. And don't spend a lot of money for an older one. They're a dime a dozen. And you can find them anywhere. They're all over the place. They are begging to be taken home. The more you know, the more you can actually offer a horse and help one, well, then maybe the younger ones will find you, or you can go find them. You can also do what you want. I'm not the boss of any of it, but I'm just saying it's a huge waste of potential on both parts, on the human student and on the horse student, to team up a green horse and a green rider. It's painful for all parties except the people making the money, the bigger money. I say that because many people who are starting out learn about the importance, or feel that they've learned about the importance of being able to collect a horse on their first or second ride. And that generally starts with getting contact, a line between the bit and your elbow, pulling back or holding tight so that you can get a firm feel of both sides of the mouth, and then starting to kind of boss them around with your legs as if you know what you're doing, and as if the horse does too. Know what you expect. These are the types of things, and why I want to dispel, to the best of my ability, the futility of jumping in hugely without doing your homework with a checkbook and a dream toward this fuzzy concept of collection, and I'm going to be a horse trainer, and here I go down the track of horse training. You will train a horse just by walking by his paddock every day and saying hello to him. That's a certain kind of training too, and that's not a bad thing. I talked in one of the earlier sessions about the horses that have 5 and 6 and 7 people a day in their life. Each one of them, if you were to ask the horse, is a trainer of a stripe. This guy has a certain way of changing the bedding. He's got a certain way with certain horses. He's got a different way with different horses. One guy might not like mares. The other one got bit by that stud. They're going to treat all the horses the same way. They offer different treatment to different people depending on how the chemistry works. This one-size-fits-all in horse training is a bit mythical. It doesn't, one size fits no one. So as you start to embrace and take on the importance of respecting the hugeness, the absolute huge amount of information that there is to know and that there is to absorb and digest and integrate into what you already do know. Maybe what you need to do is, I don't know, get a bigger head. I never knew in the beginning how much there was to know, and I'm still learning lots, actually. But to be satisfied with yourself where you are is the first step in understanding how to be satisfied with your horse where he is. It doesn't work to be self-incriminating and self-deprecating and think that your horse doesn't feel as though he's part of that. They're very, very sensitive. And when you get angry at yourself for missing a cow or knocking down a pole or missing a lead, or your horse breaks out of the your Icelandic horse breaks out of the tolt, or you whatever else is going on, you miss the race by a nose, you don't win by a nose, whatever your pursuit is with that horse as your partner, where you come in against yourself, you also come in against that horse. Just ask him. You don't see a really happy, built up, pumped up, put together horse, mentally and physically, standing next to someone who feels like a rug. You don't see that. There's no doormat person standing next to some happy-go-lucky horse, not for long. And there's no happy-go-lucky, there's no depressed horse that's going to be brought out of any sad, impoverished quagmire or abuse, misuse situation if he's rescued by somebody who's hoarding 1,000 of them just like him because he reflects their own relationship to themselves. There's plenty of that out there going on. So when you think about releasing a horse to go, releasing anything in your life to go, the butterfly that landed in your hand that you closed here and walked over and showed someone and then let go, for example. I had that happen once, actually. I shouldn't have closed my hand, but I was young. Anyhow, when you release, that's the freedom that's connected to receiving. When you look at someone who is trying to get a horse to do something, make a horse do something, they taking the opportunity to impose or demand a performance or a component of a performance with that behind it, Certainly it will be delivered eventually if someone is consistent and knows how to get it doing that. But the essence of the horse and the beauty that is released when they want to do it, and that movement is received by the trainer instead of knocked out of them or knocked into them or whatever it is. And I'm not talking now about abuse. I'm just talking about a style. You'll do that or else. Households work the same way. I mean, at some points they have to. The kids can't be running the show and the horses can't either. That's a fact. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that you become a doormat, or that you take Bill's suggestion of going with the feel of the horse so far that they're dragging you down the road into the next town. I've actually seen people who never really got to the end of the book and just followed their horse everywhere. It's great for the horse. Not really, though. Not really. But that's why these things need to be, each step along the way needs to be considered not as an end in itself. It's a component of a bigger picture. It's that 1,000-piece puzzle that you're constantly, diligently searching for where which piece fits. That phone better not fail me now. That was really disappointing earlier. Darn thing. So once you've got some of these excessive exercise routines, either you don't opt in or you've opted in and now you're not doing it anymore. Either way, the horse is going to go with what you offer and what you present. So if you finally got so that you can be around the horse on the right and the left, you can ask him to bring his head and neck around for a halter and his 4 feet are still standing there. You can bend over and he'll offer you whatever foot you reach for. You can leave him right where he stands, go to his tail and look at him in either eye behind him, tip your head out from one hip or the other, and he'll maybe glance at you. Don't beat this thing to death just a few times of doing it. Just leave it alone, just so you have it. It's, you just want to make sure it's in there. You don't need to rehearse it. It's like having your 4-year-old spell his name 10,000 times after he's learned that John has a silent H in it. You want him to spell that thing 50 or 100 times before Grandma comes for dinner so he doesn't forget it. And there goes your English major. There goes your calligrapher. There goes your student. Just get it and leave it. You want to stop your exercises while the interest is high, while the horse is with you and alert and saying, well, where is our next thing to do together? Where are we going? What are we doing? That look, that energy, that interest, that unexpended mental capacity to partner with you to the end of his days and yours. They have that in them for some reason, and it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. But the kinds of things that kill it is too much blocking of the head, too much correction, too much punishment, too much attacking of the body for simple basic movements that could be released instead of demanded. When I say attacking of the body, I mean literally confrontations and physical assaults at the head, the neck, the ribs, the hips. Come here so I can smack on you to be sure that you know I don't want you near me. Then you run into a tight rope, whip around. That is a style. That is a training style. It's been popularized and used and misused, and many people have had to come to the hard conclusion that there is a better way, because those horses aren't necessarily the ones that'll run up to you in the field. They aren't going to be the ones that'll stop when you're hanging by a stirrup either. So it's important to be friendly without being well, let's just leave it at that. It's important to be a friend. The horse needs a friend. And there are certain training styles and training techniques that leave that out and I'm not saying this for professional trainers, but I really think that most of the people who are seeking this level of clarification and this amount of detail and new, fresh way of looking at things are people who probably didn't grow up with horses. Or if they did, it's been a long time. The people who grew up with horses and the people who are professional trainers are not going to be probably too interested in what I have to say. And that doesn't matter to me. I have a job here. It's a job I knew I would have when I was really young, and that is to help the horses that are misunderstood. And what is going to be clear as you pursue refinement and pursue in a methodical, slow, respectful fashion, respectful of yourself, respectful of your horse, respectful of your family by wearing a helmet so that you don't sit here like I am now with an eye that doesn't work like it used to because I got hit on the head too many times. I got run down by a horse for that one. But I wear a helmet when I ride because what are you going to do if you land on your head? And land really hard. If you don't die, a lot of people are going to have to end up taking care of you. Or spending money so someone else can. I have someone in my family like that. So it's what to avoid. And I mention this because I haven't mentioned it yet. Or if I have, it's been in passing. But I want to make a point that an investment, we're talking about collection, and in terms of collection, we're talking about learning how to gallop without the fear of falling off and without the fear of speed. So we're going to talk about breakaway stirrups and helmets. Horses that are asked to run fast on feet that land toe first are not safe to be on. That's it on that. They're not. If they don't fall with you today, they could fall with you tomorrow. Horses with feet that are too long, with heels that are contracted, with long-term thrush, all these horses that have feet that hurt, there's a safer seat than their back, I can say. You just don't know what they're going to step on that's going to just put an extra step in there or put a stumbling move in there, and if you're a green rider, maybe you don't manage to stay on, you know. So that's why I'm suggesting that you try to match yourself with a horse that has some experience. You can always find someone else who will love him and use him when you're ready to get a horse that's got a little more life and a little more snap to suit you if that's what you're looking for. There's nothing wrong with finding a new home and a good home for a horse that's taught you what you needed to know. There is something wrong, in my view, with ruining 6 or 8 or 10 of them in a row because you have the resources to do it and not make the change that will help them advance with you. That's hard on them. That's hard on me. That's really hard on me. So I'm going to encourage you to get confident and get good help learning how to ride fast and ride fast on safe horses. And I say ride fast on safe horses, meaning a horse that you can turn and a horse that will run fast with you feeling confident that you're not going to be grabbing his mouth for balance. If you can find somebody who you trust to pony you at the trot and at the lope so that you can ride with your eyes closed and a helmet, so that you can ride corners and learn how to balance. You know, it's probably easier to learn how to ride a motorcycle fast if you've ridden behind somebody a few times. Same thing. A lot easier to learn how to drive a car if you've been a passenger, right? So once we've really started to think about that and to get those skills honed, and I want to talk about fitness now for a moment. There are a lot of ways to think about being fit and a lot of ways to think about being who you are. So whoever you are, that's who you are. Now, whoever you want to be, that's who you can be. If you have extra weight and you don't like it, off it goes. If you have bad posture and you don't like it, have someone help you with structural alignment. There's a really good person. I'll give you a name and a phone number. Somebody who's very good at this that I know quite well, who could help you with exercises for improving your structure as a rider, your posture, your way of sitting, your way of walking, your way of carrying things. She's tops. So there are many small things that we have to do, really, in my view, to earn the right to even sit up there. It's a good thing to have horses that you can get on in any condition just to try it out, but if you're going to get serious and put time and money toward that dream, do your part. It's not just enough to have somebody exercise your horse and worm him and give him shots and have a nice farrier. It's really an important thing to like who you are as a physical being. And I say that because if you don't, your horse feels that when you're up there. So what kind of message is that? He's carrying someone on his body that you don't like? Ugh. Got to fix that. That doesn't mean you need to be rail thin. It doesn't mean you can't have a pot belly. It doesn't mean anything except you got to feel good about you for the horse to feel good about you up there, especially if you're in the process of feeling somewhat distracted, pulled apart, insecure, open to a ration of new things that go against everything you may have learned and paid a lot of money to learn and cram into your head and practice until you were exhausted. Put tricks and maneuvers on every horse you ever knew. You do that for 15 years and suddenly realize there's another mousetrap you'd like to try out. That's very disconcerting. It's very hard for people to go through that. And I've seen many, many, many people take on the whole pie in one jump, go to a demo and watch Buck work a horse or come to me for a private coaching, and instead of sitting back and taking stock, want to try to do what they just saw tomorrow afternoon with a horse that they spent 15 years teaching to do something else. So if your idea of collection to date has had the components that were demonstrated and shown in that album I put up called, what was it called? Getting in a Frame, or can't remember. It was about the gray horse that was being worked, that 4-year-old gray gelding. I worked pretty hard to get the trainer out of that picture, didn't I? So, I was a top-level trainer on that one. I don't know who gave that designation, but that's the reputation. I drove a long way to see that, 11 hours, as a matter of fact. 11 hours I went to that demo. Anyhow, I'm glad I did, because I didn't understand that that's what collection was in that camp. And it made me all the more satisfied and all the more eager to refine and pursue a skill within myself to be able to share something that will look and feel a lot more like what we saw in that pen, that roan horse in that bullpen. That is positively beautiful. To be able to move like that, to have an adult horse that moves like that, to have a riding horse that hasn't had that taken out of him and has had his body maintained in that capacity, in that glistening, honorable state. I mean, that's divine intervention right there. Nothing short of it. You could weep seeing that if you let yourself. And then to have the skill to ride that, not interfere, keep that energy and intelligence and let vibrancy intact and available for yourself, my goodness, that's inspiring. And I know that right now there are people probably going to listen to this that might have just got into horses a week ago and might have been in it for more years than I've been alive. We all have our own way of looking at things. But what I'm trying to do is to help people understand that you have to be okay where you are in order to get the horse to be with you on the next step. And if you and your horse get stuck on that next step, you don't want to let him see you sweat. Don't let anybody see you sweat. That's your deal. That's your deal. Don't give your power. Like these people. I got a couple of some feedback today about what a jerk I am for putting that bull up there. Look, it doesn't matter to me what people don't like what I do. That doesn't matter. But when I see somebody get out there and hang their whole deal out, the outrage, the indignation, the pomp, the circumstance, the complaining, the holier than thou, there but for the grace of God go any of us, all this stuff. Shh. Shh. The horses don't need that from us. They really don't. If other people's choices and behaviors can tweak you out to the point where it's more important to pick a fight with someone you don't know on Facebook than it is to be down at the barn trying to figure out how you're going to get your horse to understand what you want him to do through feel and release, then I probably can't help you anyway. That's what I'm getting at. Not that we shouldn't have responses or reactions or have emotions. I'm certainly not saying that. But the amount of time people spend having ping pong tournaments on Facebook when they could be out in the field with a horse or getting a second job so they could afford a field for the horse. You know, that's a high percentage there. So now, this darn thing, I'm so mad at this phone. Let's see. Excuse me a minute, I gotta poke around in here and see how much time I have left. Wow. I think I have some percentage of battery left. Anyway, if the screen goes black, no more phone. That's what that means. I'm still learning about this. If you want your horse to bring his head off grass, and you want him to pick his wither and shoulders up and make his forehand available whenever you need it, then you're going to not take the slack out of the rope and pull his weight over the front end and drag the hindquarters behind to get him off grass. You get a longer rope, walk in behind him. Don't look back and confront him as you pull his head toward you, or you will be loading the forehand again. The idea, if we want a horse that can collect its speed and manage the upward and downward transitions without getting heavy in front, the idea is you have to have a shoulder connected to your leading rein. A forward shoulder, a lateral shoulder, two shoulders, the whole thing. You need shoulders connected to your thoughts about forward motion. You need legs that are out of the way so the shoulder can reach. You need eyesight that is elevated and posture that can follow a line of sight so that your downward cast eyes and your slouching body does not interfere with the tops of the shoulder blade and the rim of cartilage on top of that, which on many horses, depending on many, I don't know how many of you have ever been through a bone pile at a ranch, but a lot of those poor old horses have had the cartilage taken right off those shoulder blades. Some of those shoulder blades look like feathers on the end. It's unbelievable. Just unbelievable, the stories that could be told by those horses. But anyway, the saddles that don't fit cause the horse to scrunch in. As you scrunch in, your neck drops down in between. Let's not forget that the shoulder blades are suspended. There's soft tissue here. So the nice, big, broad-shouldered, hunky-chested horse that is ridden either in the wrong way or in the wrong gear for too long and schooled in the wrong way, he can close himself right up like this just to accommodate a saddle that doesn't fit, or a rider that's riding in a front-end heavy way, or a guy who's going to rope, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 too many calves before he's gotten his saddle problems figured out. And you can just change the whole body of a horse in a week, in a day. So it's very important to remember that if we want the elevation in the front, we want that neck and shoulder available so that we have something to collect. This is after you've already got the speed issues worked out for yourself. Then there has to be a way to release all that up. And it doesn't get released if he associates the slack disappearing from the lead line with your request for him to get heavy in front. So what I would do is walk back behind your horse with a long lead rope. Keep a couple coils of that rope available so that you can drop one to him as you go by. And then he'll learn. He'll start to get the confidence to pick up a shoulder and push off the hind end and follow you in a turn over the hocks when you take him, instead of just dragging him forward on the front end. He'll look at him and pull like this. So that's one thing that can get started. The other thing that I would say on the people that keep a horse in the barn in the paddock and you want to take him for a long walk, you say you don't want him to eat. Why not? Why take him for a walk? Why not let him eat? That's what he looks at all day, waiting. He waits to get out so that he can eat, put his head down and eat. That's what he's waiting for. Maybe instead of the walk 3 days a week, how about just graze with him? How about take your grooming tools out there, teach him how to give you his feet for the asking while he gets the grass he's been waiting for. Now, I don't know your horses. Maybe they have Cushing's or bad teeth, or they can't have grass, or you have, poison plants. I don't know. But the idea that a horse shouldn't eat when you're taking him for a walk, if he lives in a box stall or he lives in a barn, or he's got a stall and a run-in, are you kidding? That's all he thinks about. He's a horse. He's a grazing animal. 2 scoops a day in a bucket that's 3 feet off the ground. That's what we do for ourselves. That's not what he's got in his mind. That's not what he's thinking about. We need to think about these things. And then by putting more of ourselves into his world at a level that he can appreciate it, you're going to develop a whole new way of understanding what the future can look like. And don't look back and have too much remorse, or I wouldn't leave too much room in your life for self-pity. Get that part over with and move right on. We've all made mistakes. There's nothing wrong with being a first-time horse owner that's done his or her best. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would keep all that, that pitiful part, just keep it to a minimum. Apologize to your horse. That's important. If you feel like it. Shed a few tears. Make a new plan. And get going. This stuff waits for no one. It doesn't. You got a limited amount of time here. So do I. So the next thing, you're going to have a horse that'll follow you now instead of have to be dragged off grass. So the less dragging off grass you do, the more respect he'll have for the slack in that rein, the more respect he's going to have for the slack in in the lead rope there, the more respect he'll have for the slack in your rein, right? And as you progress in your handling on the ground and in the slack that you're willing to offer him and the slack you're willing to give yourself about not knowing everything in the world there is to know about a horse because you weren't born knowing it, let's not forget about that. You want to remember to work him on both sides. You want to try to hang out with him not by watching him graze with your knee at his eye. Put your hand over his back, maybe where you'd be sitting, because that's where he's going to see you anyway when you ride, right? When you're riding him, he's going to be seeing you behind him. Your arms will be over his withers roughly. your toe will be out there behind his elbow. Why not stand there with him? That's where you're going to have to get on from anyhow. So you work from back to front. You work from the bottom up. That's what I do. If you've got a horse with a sway back, start working the abs. Start working the adductors. You've got a horse with a tip pelvis. This is a whole other discussion we can talk about later. I do a tremendous amount of work with these things with people and their horses. And I'm very fortunate that I've got some wonderful students on the West Coast and all over, really, who are devoting themselves to expanding their knowledge about feet and bodies and hoof care and dental work. And depending on where you are, I can hook you up with people that might be able to help you. And if not, they could lead you to some like-minded sources of good information, people really working hard to figure things out in a way that can be easy for others to learn, not someone who's just going to ask you for a check and leave. You won't know any more than you did when they got there. That's not the kind of people I'm talking about in my referral list. There's nothing wrong with that. If you need that kind of help, it's nice to have that list also, but I think really sharing the knowledge is an important thing, and sharing your gifts with other people who have horses that need you is a important thing. I do a fair amount of that, and people appreciate it, and I know the horses do too. So now you're going to release your horse to the backup, and you're going to start on a lateral type of thing. What do I mean by that? That was so vague. If I'm standing on the horse's right side, and I am in his right eye and he is on my left side, that's reversed for you. Anyway, forget that. Just go with the words. I'm on my horse's right side, he's on my left side, and I want him to go over here. I don't want to run around to his left shoulder and push him over here. I want him to back up and take his shoulders across behind me and step over here to the other side. So if I want that to happen, that means that I'm going to be making use of his mind in order to tell him that I don't want him there. It's going to be a mental thing. I want to say, look, I need you over here. I could physically do that, or I could give him a little bit of room at the shoulder and ask him to back up and do a turn over the hocks and get on my other side. In order to do that, he's got to understand how to back up without being pushed. Because if the backup depends on being pushed back, that means that the place where your reins are going to be, right at his shoulder groove, are going to be so dull from being disciplined and pushed on that the movement of your lead rope up and down that shoulder groove, and later your reins up and down there, isn't going to mean much. So if you have, I'll use my scarf. I didn't get to my tack room today. Here's my rein. There's my rein. My lead rope. If the horse is waiting to feel that on his mouth because you go to that, then that means he can tune out all of this change in the relationship and feeling of that rope on his neck, and that rope changing the relationship of the amount of slack and the weight and the movement and the feel of that movable rope in your hand, from that to this, to this, to this, to this, to this, to bang. If you have to go and talk about, got to have that contact, show him who's boss, left, right, bang, bang, bang. I'm going to, you tenderize his mouth for him. You want to do all that, that's fine. But it's a waste of a good horse, because it's a lot more beautiful and a lot more stunningly impressive to anyone who is either experiencing it or looking to see the horse move off your thought. And if you don't have to wait, if you don't have to go to the point where you're just slamming him into position, knocking him over the head with your intent, blooding up his mouth and spurring him in the sides for reasons of your own, usually it's because people haven't seen something better early enough to try it and have confidence that it works. But if you're doing any version of the harder approach, a punishing approach to the lessons of submission, then any chance of lightness is chased right out of the field. But if you have a horse that's been trained that way, and his spirit is still intact, and many, many, many of them are, you can bring them around. I don't know that you can bring all those bodies around, but you can certainly bring the mind around. And you can bring the try out. You can certainly salvage a good mind and a good heart and a good disposition in a horse if they haven't been destroyed too badly physically. And many of them are right there just waiting to be adopted all over the country. They've had a lot of people that either knew a little bit or knew a lot and had no time, had a big agenda, a big budget, a big field of customers and a tight schedule. There's lots of reasons that horses get trained hard and fast. But it doesn't mean that you can't re-educate that neck to the point that when you drop that line down that shoulder groove, that whole horse is just going to reach right up and come back to you and set down in those hips and ask you where you want his shoulders. And at the same time, if he hasn't been strapped down, tied around, and gotten the matrix of nuchal ligaments that go from the top nuchal ligament down in and connect each vertebrae, like, let me see how I can do this. This is not a very good drawing. I'll have to find a picture. Get Equine Anatomy 3D on your phone. That's a good app. That'll show you. I think that's it. Equine Anatomy 3D or Horse Anatomy 3D. $9.95 on iTunes, I think, or Apple. I don't know if iTunes is the right word. It's on that blue icon with the white A in it. That's it. $9.95, and that shows you more than you'd want to know about how the horse is put together, how his shoulders tie in to the withers and the base of the neck, and how the amazing, amazing structure that they are is at our disposal if we just leave it alone. If we can replace the demand with the ask, if we can make the ask be consistent and fair and gentle enough that we are ready to see the try that is offered. Now, it's going to take some time if you don't know how to train a horse or a dog or a child. It's going to take a time to learn how to put all that I'm saying into yourself and into your world so that you've got the results that you think I'm talking about. But what's most important is that you have the results that you're talking about. And there's no contest here. It's not something that we must compete about, okay? It's nothing like that. I've probably given you enough to think about for the moment. I'm going to put another album up there with some book titles, and I'm trying to find today. I just ran out of time. I had quite a few things I had to do. I'm going to end this now because I don't have the other photographs and books and everything all laid out the way I hoped I could, so that I could just refer you as soon as this was over to one more album that has some good learning tools for you. I will suggest that you get, if you can find them, they're Deb Bennett's books. She wrote them a long time ago. Principles of Confirmation Analysis in 3 volumes. Yep, there's a red a yellow and a blue one, volume 1, 2, and 3. Somebody has not returned my blue one. Anyway, these are very helpful. She's knowledgeable and spot on with the a very easy to read, teachable style with plenty of detail that is not written in a too technical or too, it's not an unreadable thing. It's a nice companion for anybody who's interested in learning more about, for example, how to fit a saddle or why horses break down. That's one reference. I'm just thinking if there's anything else right here on this shelf. I have quite a library here. I'm going to gather these things up and put a reading list together. It's winter coming. Here's one. Now see, this is going to be backwards, but here it is, backwards. Beating Muscle Injuries for Horses. This is by Jack Maher. Unfortunately, he's passed on. He worked with the U.S. Olympic team for a long time, and, bless the guy. I had 25 common muscular problems. I learned a lot from this book. You can still get it online. I would grab it. And it's a really helpful tool. And there are many other types of small books with lots of valuable information. And if you're interested in specific help, I would really appreciate an email instead of a thing on Messenger. That Messenger, I don't mind it. Yes, I do. I hate it. Please email me, ridewell@lesliedesmond.com, if you want real answers for your specific animals. I mean, I got lots of people with racehorses and lots of people with fancy imported warm bloods, and I have, there are different types of books that will be more suitable and more fitting and written by people that are more in step and in tune with the concerns that you have if you're racing or if you're showing at higher levels of achievement internationally. And I'm happy to share with you my resources. I will absolutely give you book titles and take pictures of the covers and send them on to you. So whatever your specific needs might be, I can't necessarily get to it immediately, but I will reply without a doubt. And I've heard from some of you today that were in distress about certain things and decisions that were made. And I just say, don't dwell. Just keep moving. Don't dwell. We all make mistakes. We all make mistakes about keeping horses in places that are too small or herds that are too aggressive, or I can just say I'm no stranger to those mistakes. I've made several of them recently, and it's painful. You learn. You just keep going. That's the main thing. Just keep going. Your horse needs to see you smiling in the morning if you can manage it. I will leave you with that thought, and I will have some equipment with me next time so that I can show you how to drop a coil. I'm going to show you how to coil. I guess I should just show you how to coil a lead rope, drop a coil. And all of the things that I'm talking about here are in my audiobook. That audiobook is available online. The tracks are downloadable depending on where you live. If you're in a rural place, the whole thing is not easy to download in one chunk. If you're living out, I don't know where. If you're in an urban setting, you can get the whole thing easily downloaded. I still have hard copies of that if you want them. And there is for Christmas, here's my promotion. Here's my little Christmas promotion. There is a I'm offering a copy of Bill's book and my audiobook for $139 for Christmas. That's plus shipping. And the books are signed, and there are probably about 20 of Bill's deluxe edition books that he and Buck and I signed in '99. That is a very sort of an enhanced presentation of the book that you know. If you have that book, I don't know, but if you want it in a deluxe edition format for somebody, there are some copies of that. Those are signed and numbered. There were 350 made. Can't believe I'm putting this little pitch on the thing here, but I don't know when else I'd do it. Life is pretty full around here. And I do have halters that tie on the right for any of you in yearling, small, average, large, which is warm blood size, and draft size. Those are humongous. And I have ropes that carry a really, really tremendous amount of feel in them. If you think that sounds like BS, that's fine. I can imagine it does. But if you buy a rope from me and don't like it, send it right back. I've got someone waiting for it. All of these products are on my homepage, and they are on my homepage, the ropes and halters, and the Bill's book and the audiobook are on my shop.lesliedesmond.com. So that's my Christmas advertisement, and a lot of talking these last couple of days. I hope it's useful. I hope I'm not confusing matters, and there was one question I had today that I want to answer. Someone asked me, what's the difference between, I think it was someone from Germany, wrote and asked, what's the difference, what do I think is the difference between collection and balance? That was a question. I do want to end on that one. Not on a marketing pitch. How pitiful. The difference between balance and collection. That question reveals the exact problem that we have in this horse world about the different ways that the word is used and things that it has come to mean. If the horse isn't fallen down, he's in balance. And that's even if he's on 3 legs, okay? Again, it depends on what you mean by balance. Is it the kind of balanced horse that needs to have contact on the bit? Is it the kind of balanced horse that has learned how to travel with toe first anyhow and still pull off a blue ribbon somewhere? I mean, these are the kinds of things. When I get a question, what's the difference between collection and balance? There's a lot of difference. So to balance a horse that is collected by you is not the same as you balancing on a horse that is in self-collection and you not needing the reins to stay up there. Now, see, I'm getting into a whole new thing here. I better end this. Anyway, I can't remember the woman's name. I will write you back. I told you I would. I will write you back and answer that when I have thought through it fully. I don't want to just put out some goofy answer just to do it. But that's the kind of question that I'm getting. What's the difference between, and that was a sincere question that came right off our morning, our conversation today at 4 o'clock, before it got cut off. What's the difference? What do you think is the difference between balance and collection? A horse that is standing with one hip behind the other and a back foot sticking out to the side, he may be balanced in terms of standing up, but he's not going to have any type of balance I would want to trust my life in an athletic environment. There are many horses, I must tell you, that I see every month that I would not get on. I would not get on a lot of horses that I see people riding. And I wouldn't get on them because they're truly not fit enough to ride. How I present that to people differs depending on how much danger I think they're in, how often they ride, and what they're going to do about it. But in the end, I won't get on a horse that I don't think is comfortable in his own skin, in his own hooves, in his own back. Why would I? You know, just about the time I've got a migraine and I've sprained my ankle, I just can't wait to go run a marathon. Oh boy, on that bright note, I'm just probably a little tired now. I'm going to go, and I'm going to wish you all a good evening. Thank you for staying up, and I hope that there have been some useful pieces in here.